Hey guys, tonight we wander down a sun-bleached hill where the cicadas are humming and the breeze smells faintly of crushed thyme and something earthy, maybe old marble dust, maybe just the stubborn perfume of dry olive branches clinging to the last hints of moisture. You're here to learn about a myth so boring, so absurdly mild, that it might just lull your brain into sweet, peaceful surrender. We're talking gods in sandals, trees that do taxes better than bureaucrats, and the slow, accidental birth of a snack you've definitely pretended to like at least once. That's right. Tonight, Athena's got a gardening hobby, and somehow history never shut up about it. But I'll warn you, if you're expecting battles, monsters, or something spicy, well, you might not survive the yawn. This is Greek mythology in loafers, not sandals of flame. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the sleepy world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down the winding path toward the ruins of a temple whose name no one remembers, not because it was unimportant, but because it was overshadowed by something more leafy. The sun is low and every stone radiates warmth like a sleepy cat that's been baking all day. It's hard to imagine anything dramatic ever happening here. That's kind of the point. The story doesn't begin with a clash of titans or a divine decree. No, it starts with a hill, rocky, stubborn, and absolutely terrible for farming. This particular hill, now known as the Acropolis, wasn't special at first. Just another lump of limestone jutting into the sky, trying to stay relevant among all the mountains in Greece. But the gods were feeling territorial. Poseidon had his waves, Zeus had his clouds. Athena, well, she was new. Now Athena didn't really do casual. She sprang, fully armed, out of her dad's skull. That alone could have earned her a Netflix docu-series. But no, what she wanted, for some reason, was civic engagement. She wanted a city, her city. You shuffle closer to the edge of the path and notice olive pits scattered near the broken columns. Someone snacked here a few centuries too late. But their litter is your breadcrumb trail now. Somewhere behind you, in the murky mists of divine egos, Poseidon decided he also wanted a city. And the people, poor democratic guinea pigs that they were, thought, why not let the gods compete for the naming rights? Because if there's one thing ancient Greeks loved, it was making life unnecessarily complicated. So the challenge was set. Whoever gave the city the better gift would earn its devotion, name, and presumably some decent PR in the process. You picture it now, two gods standing before a crowd, probably on some dusty morning, when everyone really just wanted to get back to their goats. Poseidon steps forward first, always the showman. He slams his trident into the rock and, whoosh, out spurts a geyser. Salt water. Not exactly drinkable, but dramatic. A few horses maybe emerged too. Poseidon had a thing for horses. Historians still argue whether he invented them or just borrowed them from a better myth. The crowd claps politely. Then Athena steps forward. No lightning, no drama. Just her calm, analytical stare as she taps the ground gently with the butt of her spear. And from that spot, the very first olive tree curls its way out of the dust like it's been waiting there all along. Now, to modern eyes, an olive tree seems like the kind of gift you'd give at a baby shower if you really didn't want to be invited to the next one. But to the ancient Greeks, this thing was a miracle. Its wood was strong, its leaves were silver green and whispery, and its fruit, well, let's just say it took a while to figure out they were edible. But when pressed, when purified, when coaxed into oil, that golden, glistening elixir became the lifeblood of the land. It lit homes, softened skin, anointed kings, and if you really tried, could even be used in salads. Eventually. Still in that moment, most of the crowd was probably thinking, thanks, I guess. It took vision to appreciate it. The kind Athena had in abundance. Or maybe she was just tired of Poseidon winning all the splashy contests. As you sit under the stars now, you imagine that first tree, spindly, awkward, maybe just a few stubborn leaves twitching in the breeze. And yet it changed everything. Archaeologists found pollen from olive trees in Greek soil that dates back millennia. But whether this specific tree, the one Athena accidentally planted, was the first or just the best marketed, is still up for debate. Some even claim the original sacred olive tree stood on the Acropolis until it was burned by the Persians, and that it grew back the next day. A divine botany miracle, or a particularly optimistic gardener? You decide. It's quiet now, the ruins are drowsy. A breeze picks up, rustling through the skeletal branches of what might be a descendant of Athena's gift. You close your eyes and lean against the marble. It's cool, smooth, and stubbornly solid, much like the goddess herself. A cicada starts its nightly buzz, and you imagine ancient priests trying to hush it during ceremonies. Olive oil lamps flicker in your mind's eye, casting long shadows of gods and mortals trying to make sense of each other. And somewhere in that sleepy half-dream, Athena smiles, not triumphant, not smug, but quietly proud. Not bad for a goddess who just wanted a city with decent food and soft lighting. You stretch your legs, dust clings to your sandals. The myths here are gentle. They don't roar, they rustle, they hum. They wait for you to drift, not into action, but into sleep. You turn slightly, your fingers brushing across the low remnants of a wall carved with shapes long dulled by time. The sun has slipped lower now, folding itself beneath the western horizon like a tired shepherd tucking into bed. You breathe in, and the scent is unmistakable. Warm stone, faded incense, and the faint, waxy trace of ancient olives long since devoured. But there's something else on the breeze tonight, a story forming like mist around your ankles. You've already met Athena in her gardening phase, but to understand her properly, you'll need to revisit her grand entrance, possibly the worst headache in divine history. It's easy to forget how weird that birth story really is, mostly because it's told so often. People nod and go, "Ah, yes, of course, the fully armored baby from the skull, naturally." But let's rewind. Zeus, master of thunder, collector of very poor relationship choices, had heard a prophecy, because of course he had, that any child born from his current flame, Metis, would one day surpass him in power. And Zeus, not big on competition, so instead of breaking up like a normal god, he swallowed Metis whole, which even by Greek myth standards is an HR violation. Now inside Zeus's belly, Metis did not perish. She did what all ambitious women do when trapped inside the patriarchy. She got busy forging armor, crafting weapons, preparing her daughter for greatness. Meanwhile, Zeus developed what scholars generously call cranial pressure. He called for help, and Hephaestus, blacksmith of the gods, answered. And by answered, we mean he took a hammer and split Zeus's skull open like a festive melon. Cue dramatic music. Out leapt Athena, grown, armored, glowing with wisdom and perhaps a touch of resentment. She didn't cry, didn't crawl, she just stood there like, "Hello, I have ideas." Historians still argue whether this is a metaphor for strategy springing from thought or just a particularly intense headache resolution strategy. You shift on your stone seat, your shoulder brushing moss that may or may not have been touched by a philosopher at some point. The air is cooler now, and the stars above look like they've been sprinkled there by a bored god with a salt shaker. Athena was different from the start. She didn't seduce, didn't drink excessively, didn't turn into a swan, bull, or cloud to chase mortals. She was focused, bookish, and just the tiniest bit smug. She took on the arts, crafts, justice, military strategy, basically every AP class. And unlike her siblings, she didn't want chaos. She wanted order, structure, civilization. Naturally, this made her both adored and a bit exhausting. You imagine her at a godly dinner party, straightening napkins while Ares tries to balance grapes on his nose. No wonder she wanted her own city. That's how we get back to the moment when she and Poseidon faced off. Not as equals in charisma or oceanic flair, but as symbols of two very different futures. Poseidon offered a violent, flashy gift, a symbol of strength and motion. Athena gave a quiet, practical one, something that wouldn't impress you at first glance but would support you for life. And in that choice, between the horse and the tree, the soul of Athens was born. The people voted. That's the version you hear most often. Mortals, given the impossible task of choosing between two immortal egos, opted for the goddess who wouldn't drown them out of spite. Though, to be fair, Poseidon still tried. The salty geyser he'd conjured supposedly lingered on the Acropolis, a little puddle of petulance. Some say only the women were allowed to vote, since Athena was their patron, and some say that after they voted in her favour, Poseidon punished the land, and the men revoked women's voting rights out of spite. Ancient democracy had its messes too, but let's be real, Athena's gift was the better one. The olive tree didn't just grow food, it promised beauty, healing, light. It was patient, sustainable.
And it didn't rear up and kick you in the shins. Yo.
Shins. You look down at your hands, at imaginary olive oil coating your fingers, smooth, golden, slippery, like secrets. You imagine being one of those early Greeks trying to crack the mystery of the bitter fruit. How many people had to gag before someone figured out you needed to soak, brine, and press them? Somewhere there was a trial-and-error guy named Nikos, gagging into a pottery shard, muttering, "No, still awful." But once they got it right, it was magic. Trade routes opened, empires were fed, bodies were bathed, and olive oil became the symbol of purity and peace, all because a goddess jabbed her spear into a hill. It's oddly comforting, isn't it? That the birth of civilization, at least in Athens, wasn't heralded by fire or blood, but by a tree. You lean back and let that image settle. Athena, watching from the temple steps, arms crossed, half smiling as farmers and poets gathered around her gift. No speeches, no fanfare, just a nod. Like, told you it'd be useful. And below, Poseidon sighing dramatically into his trident. You blink slowly, letting your gaze wander toward the outline of the Acropolis in the distance, its silhouette drowsy in the moonlight, softened by a sky the colour of cold milk. The olive trees around you whisper like old women gossiping at market stalls, their silver-green leaves turning secrets in the breeze. Somewhere, in the deep folds of time, the citizens of that young city gathered with an impossible task. Pick a god. No pressure, of course. Just choose who gets to protect you for the rest of eternity. It's a peculiar scene to imagine. Ancient Athenians, farmers with dirt under their nails, merchants jingling with coin, poets trying too hard, standing on the sun-baked hill, squinting between two divine figures like they're watching the weirdest talent show in history. On one side, Poseidon, bronzed and bristling, trident glinting like a warning. His beard is probably sculpted to tsunami-like perfection. He stomps the ground and water explodes into the air, salty and theatrical. Maybe even a horse bursts forth just to drive home the whole "look what I can do" moment. Then there's Athena, calm, quiet, holding her spear not as a weapon but as a pointer, like she's about to give a TED talk. No explosions, no horses, just a tap on the earth, and from the cracked soil grows a slender tree, twisting, reaching, silent. A gift not of conquest but of sustenance. The vote wasn't simple. You imagine it happening in murmurs, arguments, perhaps even a few bribes. There's a version of the story where only women were allowed to vote, and they all sided with Athena, their protector. Poseidon, predictably unamused, flooded part of the land in divine protest. As a result, the men supposedly punished the women by revoking their voting rights. Ancient democracy, folks. It had issues. Still, the decision stood. The city was named Athens. A shrine to the goddess was built on the Acropolis. And somewhere nearby, Poseidon's sulky geyser of salt water kept bubbling as a reminder that he almost won. You pick up a small rock and roll it between your fingers. It's warm from the day, smooth like it's been polished by 1,000 disappointed sandals. You wonder if anyone back then realized they were witnessing the birth of an identity. This wasn't just a name on a map. It was the start of a culture that prized wisdom, strategy, and the occasional olive oil massage. And what a name it was! Athens. Not Horsopolis, not Tridenberg, but Athens, home of thinkers, dreamers, and very picky chefs. Of course, Athena didn't just stop at one symbolic tree. Oh no! She leaned into her city. She became its face, its spine, its quiet center of gravity. Statues of her rose everywhere, some with spears, some with owls, most looking like they're about to correct your pronunciation of philosophy. In her temples, people left offerings, not flashy gold or bloodied animals, but oil, fruit, soft cloth, things that nourished rather than shocked. The olive tree was sacred after all. Its branches crowned victors, its oil anointed heroes and lit eternal flames. It was medicine, moisturizer, and currency all in one. Historians still argue whether the olive tree predated the myth or if the myth sprouted around the tree like moss on stone. But either way, the connection between Athena and her gift was etched deep into Athenian bones. You can almost hear the murmur of market stalls now, traders calling out prices for plump, briny olives stored in earthen jars, street cooks slathering bread with crushed tapenade, even if they didn't call it that yet, little kids daring each other to eat one straight off the branch, always a mistake. And up on the hill, a grove reserved for the sacred trees. No one dared cut them, not even during war, not even when lumber was scarce. The trees were Athena's children, each one a living hymn. You imagine walking through that grove, each trunk gnarled with age, their bark folded like linen robes. The air would have been cool there, even on a hot day, the kind of shade that makes you whisper without knowing why. You wouldn't pluck a fruit, you wouldn't touch a leaf. You'd just sit, listening to the soft rustle, the ancient hush of branches, remembering the moment they first breathed. One tree in particular stood out. Legend says it sprouted from the very spot where Athena planted her original gift. Burned during the Persian invasion, it regrew. Cut down by conquerors, it sprouted again. They say it could not be killed. Even now you can find its supposed descendants near the Erechtheion, fenced in and fiercely protected. Locals still glance at it with a kind of reverent unease, like they're not quite sure it won't start glowing and judging them. You stretch, letting the silence soak into your skin. This isn't the flashy side of mythology. No monsters, no betrayals, no capes caught in the wind, just a tree, a city, a goddess who knew that real power doesn't always come with a thunderclap. It might, in fact, come in the shape of something small, twisting, ancient, still growing. You're not entirely sure when you started drifting, but your thoughts have softened now, wrapped in slow layers of sun-warmed stone and humming leaves. Somewhere in the folds of the myth, you remember Poseidon, still brooding, still slightly damp, and realize you never quite got the full measure of his side of the story. So now, your mind takes you back, gently, like a raft bobbing through old memories, to the moment when the sea god made his pitch. It was not by any account a subtle gesture. Poseidon, lord of oceans and tsunamis, arrived not with a whisper, but with a crash. He stormed up that dry Athenian hill like it owed him rent, his hair tangled with seaweed, beard foaming like an angry cappuccino, and his trident catching every ray of sun as if demanding applause. He wasn't here to play nice. He was here to win. And to be fair, Poseidon's resume was impressive. He'd invented the horse, allegedly, though there's some debate about whether he just found one and took credit. Classic uncle move. He also claimed dominion over everything blue and briny, fish, storms, shipwrecks. If it splashed, it answered to him. So when he struck the earth with his trident, you can bet he was expecting gasps. And sure enough, water burst from the stone, a magnificent geyser soaring into the dry air, catching the sunlight like a halo. For a heartbeat, everyone held their breath. And then someone, probably a very unlucky fisherman, stepped forward, cupped a handful of the miracle water, and sipped. Salt water. Poseidon had gifted them a magical, eternal, completely undrinkable fountain. Very dramatic, very impractical. Historians still argue whether the original myth included horses as part of his offer, or if that detail galloped in later, trying to make him look better. You imagine the murmuring crowd, some impressed, others squinting. "Thanks, I guess," one woman might have muttered. "But can it help me cook lentils?" It's easy to mock Poseidon's salty gift now, but there was real symbolism in it. Horses represented power, mobility, war. And the sea, while dangerous, also brought trade, adventure, mystery. His offer wasn't just about the water, it was about raw strength, expansion, control. Athena, by contrast, had chosen usefulness. Her olive tree was humble, quiet, but it promised stability, food, light, healing, a long game, if ever there was one. So there they stood, the god of roaring oceans and the goddess of careful thought, the horse versus the tree, chaos versus civility. And you? You might have picked Poseidon, just for the drama, just for the splash. But the Athenians, those dry, thoughtful souls, chose Athena. Poseidon didn't take it well. Gods rarely do. The myths say he flooded the lowlands of Attica in revenge. Crops drowned, villages suffered. It was a tantrum on a divine scale. The kind of overreaction that would have had Athena filing a restraining order if Olympus had a proper HR department. Still, the city held firm. They'd made their choice. And they didn't rename it Poseidonia just because the angry fish god threw a fit. They honored the olive tree, protected it, built their culture around it. And Poseidon eventually moved on to stormier pursuits. You shuffle your feet now as if testing the ground for old tremors. But all you feel is stillness. A kind of quiet that only comes from long-forgotten tempests. The kind that leave behind nothing but softened stone and the scent of crushed leaves. There's something oddly comforting about it, isn't there? That even in mythology, the flashiest option doesn't always win. That sometimes the people choose patience over power. That the legacy of a civilization can sprout not from thunder but from roots. Poseidon's fountain, they say, still bubbles near the Erechtheian temple, though you wouldn't want to taste it. It's a relic now, a reminder, a monument to what might have been. But it's Athena's tree you see everywhere, on coins, in poetry, woven into stories and pressed into oil that slicked the bodies of athletes, lit the lamps of philosophers, and anointed the brows of kings. It wasn't just a gift, it was a vision. You roll onto your side now, cheek resting against your folded hand, as if settling into the dust beside the Athenian crowd, still gathered around that modest, leafy miracle sprouting from the rocky hill. Athena, her bronze helmet gleaming in the sun, steps back from her creation, not with a flourish, not with a smug grin, but with the kind of serene satisfaction only found in library corners and quiet victories. The olive tree is, well, unimpressive at first glance. It's not tall, it doesn't sparkle. The leaves are a muted green, narrow and slightly curled, with silver undersides that tremble like old parchment in the breeze. The trunk is already showing signs of a personality, twisting, knotting, as if unsure whether it wants to grow or nap. It's the kind of plant you'd walk past in a garden centre without realizing you were ignoring royalty. But make no mistake, this tree was divine. And its fruit, let's just say the early reviews were mixed. You picture the first human brave enough or bored enough to pluck a plump, dark olive from its branch and bite down. The crunch, the bitterness, the wildly offensive aftertaste. Probably some poor farmer's child chewing bravely through tears while the adults watched, nodding thoughtfully like, needs work. Raw olives are terrible. That's a known fact. The fruit contains oleuropein, a bitter compound that makes you question all your life choices. So naturally, the Greeks did what all humans do when faced with an inedible thing. They refused to give up. They soaked them, brined them, buried them in ashes, fermented them in jars, pickled them with herbs and prayers. Eventually, somehow, someone found the magic process that turned this tiny, angry fruit into something savory, rich, and worth trading gold for. Historians still argue whether the earliest olive presses came from Crete or mainland Greece, but fragments of ancient amphorae stained with oil tell us it didn't take long before someone figured out the real trick, pressing the fruit into golden liquid. And what a discovery that was. Imagine the moment, somewhere in a stone courtyard, a heavy stone wheel crushes a batch of ripe olives. Dark green paste oozes out, thick and pungent. It's strained through baskets, the oil separating like sunlight drawn from shadows. And then there it is, glimmering in the bowl, olive oil. The taste is grassy, peppery, maybe a little wild. But it gleams. It coats the tongue. It doesn't make you cry. A miracle. And just like that, Athena's tree isn't just a symbolic gift anymore. It's dinner, it's light, it's currency. You stretch a little, and in your mind, you're walking through a dusty agora, surrounded by stalls. An old woman in a blue peplos ladles olive oil into a clay jug, tying a bit of twine around the handle, like it's a birthday gift. Next to her, a young boy smears it onto flatbread, sprinkling it with crushed herbs and sea salt. His smile is sleepy, satisfied, a simple delight. Farther down, athletes rub it onto their skin before training, both for protection and because, well, ancient Greek gym culture was aggressively moisturized, a little awkward, a little fabulous. And in the homes of priests and priestesses, oil lamps flicker all night. They're made from terracotta, shaped like seashells and lion heads. A small cotton wick soaks up the oil, burns slow and steady, casting gentle shadows onto painted walls. Athena, of course, watches all this from above, not with arrogance, with interest, like a teacher watching a clever student figure out long division in reverse. You think of all the uses for this one gift: medicine for wounds, balm for skin, offering for gods, polish for armor, base for perfumes. In time, it would even be used to anoint newborns and prepare the dead. One tree. Infinite rituals. And back at the hill, the original tree continues to grow, or rather, its legend does. Sacred trees are planted in its likeness across Athens. Some say these Morii, as they were called, were direct descendants of Athena's first olive, tended by city officials, guarded like royal pets. Damaging one was a crime, punishable in some cases by death. Because in Athens, an olive tree wasn't just wood and leaf, it was law. It was identity. You sit very still now, listening to the slow exhale of the earth, the kind of stillness that only comes from something ancient, something planted on purpose, something that doesn't need to shout to be remembered. Athena didn't just give them olives, she gave them permanence, a future that tasted a little bitter at first, sure, but only until you learned how to press it. The night air settles in like a wool blanket around your shoulders, cozy, heavy, laced with the scent of time and old stone. You shift slightly, your body warm against the earth, and you imagine yourself now as one of those early citizens of Athens, blinking down at a small ceramic dish filled with olive oil and wondering, is this a condiment, a potion, a cleaning product, all three? Welcome to the world's first truly confusing miracle. They didn't have labels, no shelf in the agora said, extra virgin, first cold-pressed, great with chickpeas. All they knew was that the bitter fruit, once soaked and pressed and handled with patience, yielded something rich and golden. And so naturally, someone tasted it, probably cautiously, possibly while glancing at the nearest priest. And the taste? It was odd, grassy, earthy, smooth, sometimes sharp, depending on the fruit and process. Not sweet, not exactly delicious, but nourishing in a way that made your lips glisten and your brain go, oh, this might be important. From there, olive oil slithered quietly into every corner of ancient life. You trace your finger along a groove in the stone beside you, maybe the edge of an old stair, maybe just erosion, and let your mind wander into the rituals of the early Athenians who took Athena's gift and turned it into a daily rhythm. They used it on their skin first, Olive oil was a cleanser, not in the scrubby, foamy sense we know today, but in a more ancient, oily, smear then scrape it off kind of way. The Greeks didn't use soap. Instead, they rubbed oil onto their skin, massaged it in, then scraped it off with a curved blade called a strigil. What came off was dirt, sweat, and probably more existential dread than anyone wanted to admit. You picture an Athenian athlete, maybe named Nicandros or Cleon, at the gymnasium. Not a modern gym, mind you, no fluorescent lighting or grunting deadlifters. This was a sunlit courtyard with marble benches, fountains, and serious opinions about discus technique. Cleon is slicked up with oil, his muscles glistening in the sun, his sandals kicked off. He's stretching dramatically because, let's be honest, someone cute from the pottery district is watching. Nearby, older men argue over politics while applying oil to their balding scalps with the reverence of holy men. It's not vanity, it's tradition, and maybe just a little vanity. Historians still debate whether these practices were mostly hygienic or ritualistic, or just a very early form of sponsored skincare routine. But what's certain is that olive oil was everywhere. It was your moisturizer, your cleanser, your cologne, your emergency torch fuel. And speaking of torches, have you ever tried to read Plato by candlelight? Don't. But in ancient Athens, the oil lamp was king. Picture it, small, shallow, clay, often shaped like animals or shells. A tiny wick soaked in oil would burn for hours. Because these weren't blinding lights, they were soft glows, perfect for muttering poetry or squinting at scrolls or just not tripping over the cat. And then there were the offerings. You see them in temples, tiny dishes of oil placed before stone statues. No one expected the gods to dip bread in it. The offering was symbolic. Light, nourishment, purity. Athena especially received oil as tribute. Not gold, not blood. Just the steady devotion of those who knew that her quiet gift was more enduring than any sword. Even funerals saw oil play a role. The bodies of the dead were anointed, their limbs lovingly coated to prepare them for the journey beyond. Not flashy, not fiery, just gentle, reverent, final. You close your eyes now, breathing deeper, letting this thought settle, that a goddess, born of war and wisdom, left behind something so domestic, so essential. Athena didn't create thunder or beasts or chaos. She gave the people a tool, and with it they built lives. You imagine ancient women hunched over stone basins, slowly crushing olives underfoot, their skirts dusted with the dry powder of old fruit. Children chasing each other through groves, ducking under branches heavy with green globes. Merchants clinking full amphorae into carts drawn by sleepy donkeys. The air thick with the scent of oil and warm pottery. This wasn't just survival, it was civilization. Olive oil wasn't flashy. It didn't roar or gallop or turn into fire, but it endured through wars, famines, and plagues, through empires rising and falling, through myths retold and misremembered. It stayed. And all because a goddess tapped the ground and said, without words, "This will be enough." You sigh softly, letting your fingers trail through the air above the stone, like you're brushing the ghost of an old story still floating just beneath the surface. Around you, the shadows lengthen, but they don't threaten. They wrap gently, like folds of a worn linen cloak, carrying the scent of oil lamps, fig trees, and dust warmed by memory. Somewhere in that long-ago crowd of curious Athenians, debate is still buzzing. They've seen the gifts. E-gifts. They've heard the arguments, and now the pressure is on. Which god gets the key to their city? No one wants to be the one who insults a deity. That's how you end up cursed with frogs in your wine or your sheep learning how to unionize. But still a decision must be made. The people gather in the Areopagus, the rocky hill of deliberation, under the slow gaze of both gods. Poseidon waits with arms crossed, sea foam clinging to his ankles. Athena stands like the stillness before dawn, her gaze sharp but calm. It is a quiet moment, heavy with the weight of myth and olive pollen. And then it happens. The vote. Not thunderous, not shouted, just decided. Athena is chosen. The olive tree, strange and squat and glistening in the Athenian sun, is officially deemed the better gift than a fountain of salt water, and possibly a hoofed animal with no real long-term utility plan. The city is named Athens. It could have been something else, Poseidopolis, Salt Springs, Hippo Haven, we'll never know, but now it is hers. And like all victories in the divine world, this one comes with a bit of drama. Poseidon does not take the loss gracefully. In what may be mythology's earliest recorded act of revenge pouting, the sea god immediately floods part of the Attican lowlands. Crops drown, clay roads melt into slippery canals. Children are probably told not to play in the divine floodwater unless they want gills. The sea withdraws eventually, but it leaves behind more than destruction. It leaves behind the unspoken rule: don't embarrass a god in public. They hold grudges, especially the splashy ones. Athena, for her part, does not gloat. She simply turns her attention to the mortals who chose her, perhaps with a small, satisfied flick of her bronze-plated eyebrow. She doesn't throw festivals in her honor, not yet. She doesn't demand temples, though they'll build her plenty. She gets to work. You picture her strolling through the dusty streets, inspecting homes, watching artisans craft clay oil jugs, pausing at a loom where a young girl nervously weaves her first linen tunic. Athena is a goddess of thought, not thunder. She operates in quiet corrections, nudges towards structure. And with her presence woven into the city, Athens begins to change. They plant more olive trees everywhere. The groves stretch along the hills, their roots creeping between stones, their silver leaves flickering in the sunlight like the city is constantly shimmering. They call them moriae, sacred trees. They belong not to individuals, but to the city.
And damaging one. That's not just a fine, that's blasphemy. You imagine a man caught chopping a branch in secret, maybe for firewood. A neighbour reports him, and soon he's standing in front of magistrates, stammering about how cold it was and how small the branch had been. No use. The law is the law. The trees are sacred. They are Athena's. This wasn't just civic devotion. This was legal, cultural, even spiritual infrastructure. The olive tree becomes a symbol, not of luxury, but of quiet permanence. It stands through droughts. It twists and survives, even when half-burnt. You can't eat it raw, and it asks for care. It's a stubborn, useful, deeply Greek thing, and so it becomes the soul of the city. You glance upward now, and for a moment you see the outlines of branches above you. Real or imagined, it doesn't matter. They sway slightly, catching the moonlight. You think of olive oil being poured from a clay jug into a shallow dish beside a hearth.
You think of athletes rubbing it into their shoulders before a race. You think of a priestess dabbing it onto the brow of a newborn and whispering a prayer to the goddess who gave them their name. The choice had been made, not for power, not for glory, for wisdom, for endurance, for a tree. And in that quiet, glistening moment of acceptance, a civilization took root. The moon has drifted higher now, hanging overhead, like a solemn silver coin, one that Athena herself might have slipped into your palm as a tip for choosing practical footwear over sandals with wings. You shift gently, the ground beneath you cool and forgiving, like the kind of mattress only found in myths and guest rooms. Athens has been named. The people have cast their vote. And the gods, well, they've all retreated to their separate corners of Olympus. Most of them, anyway. Poseidon is still grumbling somewhere, probably chasing storms or telling the same story about how he totally had them until the olives showed up. But down in the city, things are different now. A goddess has been chosen, and she is watching. Now, naming a city after a deity is no small matter. You don't just change the sign and move on. There are rituals, celebrations, grand thank you gestures that may or may not involve goats. And of course, there's the naming ceremony, a moment that in true Athenian fashion was likely full of decorum, debate, and at least one person arguing that it should have been called something less feminine. You imagine it, a gathering of elders on the steps of a newly cleared space, soon to become the Acropolis. There are garlands, probably, maybe someone's playing a very sleepy lyre in the background. And standing nearby, silent but unavoidable, is the olive tree, small but impossibly present, like it knows this whole affair is happening because of it. There's no thunder, no fanfare, just a single statement, carved or spoken. This city shall be known as Athens. Poseidon, notably not invited to the reception, makes one final passive-aggressive gesture. Depending on which version you follow, he either withdraws into the sea with dramatic waves or leaves behind that eternally bubbling spring of salt water near the Erythraean, just to make sure people don't forget who almost won. And he needn't worry. The city remembers. To this day, that spring is said to still whisper Poseidon's name when the wind rushes through the narrow temple halls. Some say if you listen close enough you can hear a faint splashing like applause or perhaps sulking. Historians still argue whether this was a sacred geological quirk or just an unusually determined plumbing issue. But there, beside it, sits the olive tree. Its roots press into the rock, its branches bend toward the light. And Athenians begin building their city not just around it, but because of it. They construct temples, roads, and homes with the awareness that this tree and the goddess behind it demands more than admiration. She demands purpose. You feel that purpose now coiled quietly beneath your spine like the warmth of a slowly burning oil lamp. Because Athena didn't just give them a plant, she gave them an identity. Where other cities boasted of their military conquests or god-kissed bloodlines, Athens would boast of philosophy, of law, of arts and strategy and self-examination. Not that they avoided war, oh, far from it, but they treated war like calculus, brutal, necessary, complex. And overseeing it all, the goddess who'd been born from a thought, a burst of logic with a helmet and sandals. You picture her statue rising in the center of the Acropolis, not the famous Parthenon version that comes later, but something earlier, simpler. A stone figure standing tall, spear in one hand, owl perched on her shoulder, eyes that look not at you, but through you. Watching not what you say, but what you build. The Athenians begin to leave her offerings, not because they're afraid, but because they respect her. Amphorae of oil, small loaves of bread, laurel crowns, things that speak not to indulgence but to growth. And in this quiet, civil act of devotion, something extraordinary happens. Athens begins to change the world. You let that thought rest gently in your mind as if placing a smooth pebble into a bowl. Not with a bang, not with a flood or a curse or a clash of titans, but with the naming of a city, the growing of a tree, the flicker of a lamp held up to darkness. Athena watches, as always, not from a throne, but from the spaces between things, the line of a roof beam, the edge of a scroll, the groove in a potter's wheel. Her power is not in her presence, but in her principle. And somewhere beneath the surface, Poseidon's spring still gurgles, the olive tree still rustles, and the city that bears her name continues to murmur in its sleep. You settle deeper now, your body practically moulding to the ground like an old amphora tucked into earth. Somewhere off in the distance, an owl calls, a low, thoughtful sound, more observation than alarm. And if Athena were ever to choose a bird to echo her essence, it would be that one, quiet, wide-eyed, and always watching the parts of the night no one else sees. It's easy to imagine her up there on the Acropolis, not basking in glory, but quietly taking notes. Her olive tree has taken root, her name has claimed the city, and now she tries to be what these people need, which is awkward when you're a goddess of war. Let's pause here, just briefly, and consider how strange that really is. Athena, revered as a goddess of wisdom, law, logic, craft, and clever battle strategy, is still a goddess of war, but not the chaotic, blood-smeared, dragon-roaring kind. That domain belongs to her half-brother Ares, he of the spear-slinging, enemy-punching, chest-thumping variety. Ares wants the noise, the fury, the sound of shields splitting and sandals squeaking across muddy battlefields. Athena? She wants a plan. You roll onto your back now, eyes tracing constellations above you, and you imagine a battle between the two, not with swords, but with philosophies. Ares roars and charges in with a flaming spear. Athena sits back, folds her arms and whispers something like, "You didn't even flank your left side. Amateur." She doesn't enjoy violence. She understands it. She doesn't crave chaos. She predicts it. In Athens, she doesn't preach conquest. She teaches defense, deterrence, errance, positioning. She's the embodiment of the war you didn't have to fight because you were just clever enough. It's said that during one particularly tense moment in early Athenian history, a neighboring tribe threatened war over border disputes. The elders prepared offerings to Ares. Drums were beaten, torches were raised. But one priestess stepped forward, quietly suggesting an alternative. A sacred olive branch, Athena's symbol, a sign of reason over rage. It was carried across enemy lines, tentatively, maybe with shaking hands. And the other side paused, just long enough to let someone offer a treaty instead of a javelin. Historians still argue whether this story is fact or moral metaphor, but what we do know is that the phrase offering an olive branch has endured for thousands of years. And it began here, with Athena, with the tree. You shift again, gently now, as if not to disturb the weight of that quiet diplomacy hanging in the air. The Athenians knew their goddess could wield a spear, but they also knew she rarely needed to. Her true weapon was thinking before speaking, planning before striking, and choosing the moment when silence said more than 1,000 war cries. Even her armor reflected this balance. Yes, she wore a helmet, but often pushed back on her head. Yes, she carried a shield, but one inscribed with Medusa's head, a deterrent, not a blade. Athena's power wasn't about destruction. It was about saying, I could, but I'd rather build. And build she did. Workshops dedicated to metalwork, pottery, weaving, all under her domain. Schools opened, eventually, places where people debated ideas instead of stabbing each other over them. Civic forums, temples, water systems, all laid out with the goddess of order in mind. Even the Athenian legal system credited Athena with its founding principles. When Orestes, who murdered his mother to avenge his father, Greek myths folks, always a family dinner gone horribly wrong, was tried by a jury, it was Athena who cast the deciding vote in his acquittal. Not because he was innocent, but because the people needed law, a system, structure, even when the crimes were tangled and the emotions messier than a Dionysian after-party. You lie very still now, letting that thought linger like the last note of a harp string, that a war goddess chose to end a cycle of blood not with vengeance, but with jury duty. She didn't eliminate conflict, she contained it. You picture the Parthenon rising from the rock, a slow, careful construction, each marble block laid like a quiet thank you. Columns etched with stories, paintings gleaming with her likeness, the whole structure pointing not toward heaven, but toward reason. This was Athena's war, not against enemies, but against ignorance, not for land, but for legacy. And as you drift at the edge of sleep, you feel her presence, not booming or divine, but thoughtful, measured, watching, always watching. You curl in a little closer to yourself now, as if the story's warmth is something you can pull over your body like a blanket spun from myths and faint sandalwood. The olive trees in your mind rustle softly, and the firelight of ancient oil lamps flickers in rhythm with your breath. Your journey through old Athens is slow now, winding like a worn footpath between stories. And tonight, we slip into one of the most surprisingly intimate corners of the ancient world. Skincare routines. Yes, you're going to the spa, ancient Greek style. No cucumber slices, no whale sounds, just a whole lot of olive oil. Imagine this, you're standing in the palaestra, the public training ground, not just for exercise, but for bathing, gossip, and the occasional philosophical debate about whether olives are better brined or salted. The air is warm, humming with the sound of sandals scuffing against stone, soft laughter, and the shullop of oiled limbs being prepared for either wrestling or dinner. It was often hard to tell which. A young man, let's call him Dorian, because of course, stands by a column, naked except for a thin cloth slung over one shoulder. He dips his hand into a wide, shallow bowl filled with golden olive oil. He's not preparing to cook, he's getting clean, you blink. But yes, oil for cleaning. That was the norm in ancient Greece. Soap? Not really a thing. The Greeks believed in the strigil, a curved metal tool, often bronze or iron, sometimes decorated with lions or gods, and about as graceful as shaving cream with a sword. You'd coat yourself in olive oil, then scrape it off, along with dirt, sweat, and whatever philosophical despair had clung to you from your last Plato reading. It sounds unpleasant, but it worked, and it left you gleaming. Historians still argue whether the ritual had more to do with hygiene or with vanity, or maybe both. After all, glistening in the sun like a freshly polished amphora was something of a status symbol. Even the warriors did it. Hoplites heading into battle would often rub down with oil, not just for looks, but because it helped keep the skin supple under armor. And perhaps more quietly, because it reminded them of home, of temples, of Athena's quiet, oily fingerprint on every part of their lives. You lean back now, imagining the steam rising from clay boilers, the sound of conversation echoing in tiled rooms. Women had their own spaces, usually more private, less public spectacle, but just as saturated with olive oil. They massaged it into their hair, their faces, their arms. They knew its value before it had a price tag. And here's a lovely fringe fact. Some of the earliest recorded beauty recipes in history come from this time. One, believed to be inspired by Athena's temple attendants, calls for olive oil mixed with beeswax and rosewater to create a sort of moisturizer. You probably wouldn't find it in Sephora, but it smelled divine, and people swore it kept wrinkles away. Whether or not Athena wore eyeliner is up for debate, but you'd better believe she approved of a well-maintained face. And it didn't stop at skincare. The oil became a core part of ceremonies. Infants were anointed with it at birth, tiny bodies slicked with gold under the gaze of gods. Warriors received it before battle. The dead were bathed in it before burial, their bodies shining softly in the lamplight as a final act of respect. Olive oil was continuity, a thread that wove through every life stage, from the first breath to the last. And oh, those lamps. You imagine one now, small and humble, maybe shaped like a dove or a curled fish. The wick burns low, just a faint blue flame, like it's whispering rather than illuminating. In every Athenian home, these lamps burned, on kitchen shelves, beside beds, in the alcoves of prayer. Even in the grand temples, rows of lamps lined the inner sanctums, not torches, not roaring fires, just oil, glowing, subtle, eternal. Athena's presence wasn't loud. She didn't demand pillars of fire or flocks of peacocks. She asked only for vigilance, thoughtfulness, and a clean face if possible. You smile a little at that, imagining the goddess walking through the palaestra, not as a deity descending in glory, but as a quiet supervisor checking for posture and proper exfoliation. She wouldn't interrupt. She'd just tilt her head slightly as if to say, "You missed a spot." There's something oddly human about her. Not cold, not unreachable, but precise, focused. The kind of divine presence that doesn't scold, it reminds. You reach out in the dark, fingertips brushing nothing but air, yet you feel as though you've touched the stone rim of a centuries-old oil bowl. Still warm, still fragrant. And all around you, the night glows, not with electricity, not with fire, but with the gentle breath of olive oil lamps, thousands of them burning through time, through war, through philosophy, through myth, through sleep. Somewhere between sleep and waking, you drift down a stone pathway lined with olive trees, their silvery leaves fluttering like old scrolls in the night wind. Your feet tread softly over ancient dust, and you hear the echoes of footsteps long gone, merchants, poets, generals, children skipping with sticky fingers, all of them brushing past the same sacred trees. And above it all, Athena watches, silent and impossibly still. But not everyone in Athens appreciated her gift. You pause beside a twisted tree, its trunk so gnarled it looks like it's mid-sentence. It's here that you start to sense something else, a tension beneath the olive-scented peace. Because in myths, nothing remains sacred for long. And Athena's olive tree? It had enemies. The first and most bitter of these was, unsurprisingly, Poseidon. Still salty, literally and emotionally, from losing the naming rights, Poseidon didn't let it go. According to some obscure fragments of lore, he kept whispering curses into the roots of olive trees, not powerful enough to kill them. No, that would be too simple, but just enough to make them struggle. Droughts began to sneak in more often. Blights curled the leaves. Insects started appearing, tiny biting things that made farmers mutter under their breath and clutch at sprigs of thyme like it was divine bug spray. The most notorious pest was the olive fly, a creature so small and persistent that it could ruin an entire harvest. It laid its eggs in the fruit, and when they hatched, the larvae would tunnel through the olives, leaving behind a mess that no amount of brining could save. You wrinkle your nose now, imagining a crate full of olive oil that smells just off. Not rancid, just tired. A reminder that even divine gifts aren't immune to decay. Historians still argue whether these agricultural setbacks were real plagues or poetic exaggerations. But what's clear is that the olive tree, Athena's chosen emblem, struggled. And for a goddess who prized control, who embodied logic and foresight, watching her gift falter must have been
humbling. There's even one curious myth, rarely told, where Athena herself regrets giving the olive tree to Athens, not for political reasons, not because she wanted a horse after all, but because the tree, once sacred, began to be taken for granted. You picture it now, merchants arguing over oil prices, adulterating the good stuff with cheap pine resin, officials cutting corners, planting trees in shallow soil just to fulfill quotas, sacred groves neglected, offerings skipped. And perhaps the goddess stood at the edge of a grove one morning, hands clasped behind her back, frowning ever so slightly at a tree whose branches drooped from neglect. Athena didn't scream, didn't hurl thunderbolts, but maybe she did something worse. She turned away for a while. That's when the worst blight hit. A mysterious fungus, black streaks on bark, leaves falling like coins from emptied hands. The oil turned cloudy, bitter. Amphorae cracked from sudden temperature shifts. Farmers panicked.
Temple priests rushed to purify the groves. Citizens whispered about divine punishment. And always, the question, had they failed Athena? You lie still now, listening to the imagined murmur of prayers drifting upward like smoke. Forgive us, they say. We forgot what the tree meant. But Athena, being Athena, didn't stay angry forever. She didn't burn the groves. She didn't smite the insects or flood the pests with boiling oil. That wasn't her style. Instead, she gave them knowledge. Scholars emerged, agricultural treatises were written, methods improved. Some claim Athena herself appeared in dreams to certain farmers, offering them visions of better irrigation, pruning techniques, and pest management. A divine tutorial, if you will. And slowly the trees returned, not stronger, just respected. You reach out now in your mind, your hand brushing against a low-hanging branch, cool and fragrant. A leaf sticks to your skin like a reminder. A lesson, even divine gifts demand maintenance. You can't just receive wisdom, you have to tend it. You can't just plant a tree and walk away. You must prune, you must nourish, you must remember. The grove you walk through now is healthier than before, but quieter, wiser. Each tree stands like an elder, bearing not just fruit, but stories. The olive oil they yield glows with a new reverence, pressed more carefully, poured more slowly, lit in lamps with steadier hands. And somewhere nearby, Athena nods, not in triumph, but in quiet relief. her gift nearly forgotten, nearly ruined, has been restored. Not by divine intervention, but by human effort. You smile in your half-sleep, knowing that this is the kind of myth that doesn't end in fire or fate, but in compost and patience. You're walking again now, slowly, dreamily, through a narrow path between trees that feel older than memory itself. The breeze has shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of something feathered. You look up. A crow is watching you, its beady eyes glint with the smugness of a creature that has absolutely seen things. It ruffles its wings once, then cocks its head, as if to say, "Ready for some gossip?" Because, oh yes, there was a talking crow, and not just any talking crow. This one was present for some of Athena's more awkward moments, and if ancient myths are to be believed, it may have been the first recorded victim of divine overreaction via bird-based miscommunication. Let's back up. So Athena, goddess of logic and restraint, was once entrusted with raising a very important infant, Erichthonius. Not your everyday baby, he was, depending on the version, either the son of Gaia or born from the earth after a rather unfortunate mishap involving Hephaestus, spilled divine fluids, and a bit of wool. You don't need the details. Let's just say Athena ended up with a sacred baby in a basket. She tucked him away in a box and gave it to the daughters of King Cecrops to watch over, instructing them firmly not to open it, which of course meant they opened it within 5 minutes. Inside the box was the child, and depending on how sleepy the storyteller is, he either had the lower body of a serpent or was coiled in one like a swaddling tail. Either way, not your average bundle of joy. Now here's where the crow comes in. Athena had appointed the bird as a kind of lookout, a divine messenger, maybe even a feathery tattletale. And when the king's daughters peeked into the forbidden box and screamed at what they saw, the crow immediately flew to Athena with the full report. What a loyal, obedient little avian. Athena, however, was not pleased, not because the crow lied, but because it told the truth too soon. The exact myth is murky. Some say she cursed the daughters with madness, others say they jumped off a cliff in terror. But the crow, poor bird, just trying to do its job? She cursed it, yes. Athena, queen of intellect and reason, goddess of calm analysis, got a little bit cranky with a bird for being too efficient. She turned the crow's feathers black permanently, took away its sacred status, banished it from her presence, and from that day forward, crows were never sacred again. You pause beneath a tree now, the moonlight dappling across your hands, and you think, that feels weirdly relatable. We've all had a boss who didn't appreciate our timely emails. We've all reported the problem too early, only to be blamed for the problem itself. Poor crow, it just wanted a raise. Historians still argue whether this myth is about trust, the dangers of curiosity, or just the ancient Greeks being hilariously suspicious of birds. But one thing's for sure, Athena had a temper, not often, but when it snapped, it was fast, precise, and deeply symbolic. Still, despite the drama, crows remained woven into Athenian myths, always lurking, always watching. They perched on rooftops, they haunted groves, they picked at leftovers during temple festivals, and cawed like tiny messengers no one wanted to hear. And they remembered. There's something strangely comforting about that. That even in a world of gods and marble and flaming horses, there were still birds muttering in trees, keeping tabs on divine slip-ups. You can almost hear one now croaking softly from a branch overhead. "Don't open the box," it whispers. "Too late," you whisper back. But the damage isn't permanent. The crow, though banished, found its own niche. It became the bird of secrets, of thresholds, of quiet judgment. You don't pray to it, but you listen when it shows up. And Athena. She moved on. She may not have made peace with the crow, but she never repeated the mistake. From then on, she left less to chance. She calculated better. She trusted fewer creatures with sacred boxes. The lesson had been learned, and that's the strange magic of these quiet myths. They don't always end with a neat bow. Sometimes they end with a sulking bird and a goddess thinking, okay, maybe I overreacted. The crow flaps once, lazily, and disappears into the dark. The grove settles again, and the olive trees, ever patient, pretend they didn't hear a thing. The branches above you sway gently now, casting soft, shifting shadows across your arms like the fingers of gods passing over a sleeping child. The olive leaves rustle just enough to make you think they're whispering, perhaps about that dramatic crow, or perhaps about something far more exciting, sports. Because believe it or not, olive oil wasn't just for ancient moisturizers, ceremonial offerings, or dipping rustic bread. No, in the dusty fields just outside the Athenian walls, in the heart of thunderous applause and grunting competition, olive oil found itself in the thick of the very first Olympic Games. You stretch slightly, the thought of movement enough to make your joints creak, and you imagine the heat of an Athenian afternoon, the sun beating down on bare shoulders, the sand hot underfoot, and the air absolutely thick with anticipation. And olive oil, lots of olive oil. Athletes in ancient Greece competed nude. Let's just pause there. Yes, completely. Not as a statement of rebellion or shock value, but because it was considered pure, honest, and aesthetically pleasing. Clothing was seen as a barrier to performance and art. So there they stood, runners, wrestlers, discus throwers, shining in the sun, covered from head to toe in a thick sheen of oil. And not just any oil. This was extra sacred oil, pressed from olives, harvested from Athena's own groves. These weren't your average olive trees, these were the Morii, state-owned, sacred, and law-protected. Their oil was considered so precious, it wasn't sold to just anyone, it was gifted, bestowed, used in religious rites, ceremonies, and, most iconically, as the reward for athletic excellence. You picture a young competitor, let's call him Timon, standing at the edge of the field, wiping a hand nervously down his gleaming thigh. He's about to run the stadium, a sprint of roughly 200 meters. The crowd roars, sandals shuffle, and someone nearby is selling figs with very aggressive enthusiasm. Timon's heart pounds. He's trained for this, fasted, prayed, massaged his legs with oil each morning for weeks. Because if he wins, he doesn't just earn glory, he earns olive oil, the prize amphorae, tall, beautifully painted ceramic jars, each filled to the brim with Athena's oil. A single champion might walk away with dozens. In modern terms, that's like winning not just a trophy, but a lifetime supply of gold-covered wellness smoothies and their own Instagram deal. And these jars weren't generic either. They were Panathenaic amphorae, specially crafted for the Panathenaic Games held in Athens in honor of, you guessed it, Athena. On one side, the image of the goddess herself standing tall, armed and watchful. On the other, the specific event, javelin, wrestling, boxing, etched in bold, heroic lines. You roll your head slightly, imagining a dusty courtyard filled with winners. Clue, winners clutching these tall amphorae like prized fish. The oil inside was not just valuable, it was identity, status, evidence that you had not only strength, but favor. It would be sold or traded, of course, sometimes used to fund a new roof or throw a celebration, but most of all it served as proof that you had earned a place in Athena's story. And back on the field, the rituals continued. Athletes didn't just rub on oil for style, they believed it kept their muscles warm, protected their skin, and connected them spiritually to the gods. And afterward, after the dust settled and the applause died down, they scraped it all off with their trusty strigils, along with the sweat and sand and stress of competition, collected in jars, sometimes even sold to fans. Yes, you heard that right. People bought post-athlete body oil like it was sacred cologne. Ancient merchandising 101. Historians still argue whether the oil gave any actual athletic advantage, or if it was more psychological, but it hardly matters. For the Greeks, oil wasn't a product. It was a ritual, a bridge between the body and the divine. And nowhere was that bridge more vividly seen than in the great stadiums of Olympia and Athens. You imagine walking those long stone hallways after the games, the sun setting, the oil jars stacked neatly like sleepy soldiers. Statues of past champions gleam in the fading light, their names carved beneath feet that had once pounded earth to thunder. And somewhere, high above, Athena watches, not from the stands, but from the olive groves beyond. Her branches swaying in approval, not for victory itself, but for the discipline behind it. Because for her, glory wasn't about domination, it was about preparation, precision, quiet excellence. And as you exhale, the image fades gently, leaving behind only the smell of dust, sweat, and something green and golden. You rest your head a little deeper into your pillow. Or maybe it's a stone worn soft by centuries of imagined footsteps, and the world around you shifts again. The shouts of athletes fade, replaced by something quieter, more mysterious. The olive groves grow darker here, their trunks thicker, twisted like secrets, and the leaves shimmer with a strange hush. You're not in the stadium anymore. You're in a garden hidden behind the veil of incense smoke and whispered prophecy. This is the secret olive grove of the oracle. Now, you've probably heard of the Oracle of Delphi, Apollo's high priestess, perched above a fault line, inhaling sweet-smelling fumes and muttering cryptic fortunes like a mystical customer service line with no hold music. But there were other oracles, quieter ones, tucked away in sacred groves and silent courtyards, where the goddess Athena was said to speak not with riddles, but with clarity, and always near olive trees. One such grove, nestled on the outskirts of Athens, was known only to a few. It wasn't marked with columns or gold statues. No dramatic temple stairs, just a narrow path, overgrown, leading to a walled garden where the olive trees grew in perfect silence. This wasn't a place of spectacle, it was a place of listening. You step into the grove now, the scent of crushed leaves underfoot, and you notice that the air here is different, cooler, more still, as if the grove itself is holding its breath. In the centre sits a stone bench, worn smooth, surrounded by 7 olive trees in a circle. Each one is said to represent a gift from Athena: wisdom, patience, strategy, protection, clarity, justice, and curiosity. The last tree always seems to lean just a little closer. Here, young women training as priestesses would come to meditate, to listen, and sometimes to receive messages. But these weren't thunderous visions or flaming scrolls descending from the sky. Athena was more subtle than that. Her voice was said to come through the wind in the leaves, through the shifting of branches, through the gleam of oil on water. You had to pay attention. And the older priestesses, they could tell you exactly how the trees were feeling. If the leaves shivered too early in the season, a bad harvest was coming. If the oil from the inner grove ran too thick or too pale, it meant a war would be lost. If the 7th tree refused to bloom, well then someone in the city had made a choice that Athena did not approve of. You feel a shiver down your back now, though not from fear, from reverence, from the quiet realization that even in a world of gods, true guidance required stillness. You had to be willing to wait for the olive to ripen, to press slowly, to pour carefully. Athena did not reward haste. It's said that during times of political unrest in Athens, certain leaders would sneak into this grove at night, not in full regalia, not with crowds, but alone. They'd sit on the stone bench, stare into the darkness, and ask a question with no words. Sometimes they'd hear nothing, other times a single breeze would blow. And that was enough. Historians still argue whether these visits actually changed policy or were just nervous rituals before big votes. But what's undeniable is that the grove existed. Bits of pottery have been found, scorch marks from old oil lamps, tiny bone pins used to fasten robes. Even a clay owl, so worn by time its eyes look more like teardrops now. You pick it up in your mind's hand, brush the dirt away and hold it to your heart. It's not grand, not gold, but it means something. The priestesses believed Athena lived in that grove, not in body, but in presence. She didn't hover or appear in smoke, she simply was. In the way the trees bent to shelter, the way the oil poured without spilling, the way the answers arrived only after the question was truly understood. You lean back now, feeling the breeze drift through the imagined trees, and, for a moment, it carries something to you. Not a voice, not a vision, just a sense of something right, something settled. And somewhere in the heart of the olive grove, the seventh tree finally blooms. You stay seated beneath the newly blooming tree, not because you're waiting for more visions, but because the air here feels thick with something you can't quite name, a calm, a wisdom.
A sense that the soil remembers every footstep, every whispered prayer, every moment of hesitation, before someone finally asked the question that had been brewing in their chest for days. And that's when you hear it, a soft clink, a pestle against stone, the faintest smell of brine and garlic and crushed green fruit. You're in Athena's kitchen now, or at least the closest thing the goddess of wisdom and military strategy ever came to one. No one ever accused Athena of being a cook. She was more the organize the battle plan type than the what's for dinner type. But that didn't stop the people of Athens from weaving her into every corner of life, including the culinary. And of course, olive oil wasn't just for lighting lamps or anointing statues.
It made its way into the kitchens, those smoky, busy, clay-walled kitchens where mortals tried to figure out what to do with this greenish gold miracle that tasted like peppery sunshine and faintly overgrown gardens. Imagine a clay bowl sitting on a worn wooden slab. A woman, call her Ione, is hunched over it, her sleeves rolled, her fingers oily, her mortar full of crushed olives, capers, and garlic. She's humming a song she half remembers from temple processions, not because she's trying to summon Athena, but because it feels right. This is arguably the birth of tapenade. It didn't have a name yet, not a fancy one, no label, no marketing, just something spreadable that kept well in a cool jar and made stale bread taste like a celebration. Olive oil was the glue of ancient cooking. It bound stews, it softened lentils, it turned raw herbs into something luxurious. And it made even the most basic peasant meal taste like a minor miracle, when it didn't taste like actual olives, which, let's be honest, were still hit or miss, depending on how long they'd been soaking. But the beauty of it was this: everyone used it. The wealthy used it with imported spices, foreign grains, delicate little cakes flavoured with honey and orange blossom. The poor used it to fry onions and smear on bread with a pinch of salt. Soldiers carried flasks of it. Sailors dunked hard cheese into it. Children were fed spoonfuls during illness. And every Athenian household had at least one amphora half full and gleaming near the fire. Even philosophers. You picture Socrates with a hunk of bread in one hand, waving the other as he questions a dinner guest. But what is flavour truly? And does it exist independent of the bread, or only in the context of the oil? His companion nods slowly, unsure whether this is part of the conversation or just Socrates being hungry again. Athena's influence stretched even into these quiet meals, not because she invented recipes, but because the ingredients themselves were hers: the olive, the tree, the idea of making something practical into something beautiful. There's a lesser-known myth, likely a fringe tale, passed down in taverns and whispered by cooks with too much imagination, about a time when Athena challenged Dionysus, god of wine and all things chaotic, to a contest, not of strength, not of song, but of hospitality. Each was to host a banquet. One would represent pleasure, the other nourishment. Dionysus went wild, of course, grapes tumbling from the ceiling, music, wine that poured itself, guests dancing until they didn't know where they ended, and the next person began. Delicious? Yes. Memorable? Probably. A bit blurry? Definitely. Athena's feast, by contrast, was quiet. Bowls of olives and lentils, bread dipped in freshly pressed oil, figs, goat cheese, a drizzle of honey, every flavour designed to balance, to linger, to satisfy but never overwhelm. Her guests left not dizzy, but restored. According to the myth, when the gods judged the two feasts, they called it a tie. But everyone who left Athena's table remembered the meal days later. Dionysus's guests just remembered they'd lost a sandal. You chuckle quietly in your half-sleep, imagining the goddess with a kitchen towel over one shoulder, tasting a stew with the tip of her finger, nodding approvingly before sliding a loaf into a fire-warmed hearth. And you understand something then. Athena didn't need to cook, but her gift, the olive, made cooking better, more thoughtful, more lasting, more connected, because a meal isn't just food, it's a ritual, a gesture, a memory that lives in the spaces between the bread and the bowl. And in every one of those moments, in every shared meal under an olive tree, every drizzle of oil across hot stone bread, Athena was there, not commanding, just present, watching, encouraging, whispering in the steam. The fire has gone low in your mind now, barely a flicker, just the red-orange glow of coals beneath a bed of ash. And still, the olive oil burns gently, giving off just enough light to warm the memory. You're no longer in a kitchen. You're seated at a long, low table beneath the stars, wooden cups, clay dishes, the smell of roasted herbs, laughter that rises and falls like the breeze. This is not a feast of abundance. It's a meal of meaning, because tonight you're witnessing the first olive branch held out in peace. It didn't begin as a tradition. No ancient law said, when in doubt, hand someone a twig. But as wars grew longer and victories grew more expensive, the Athenians and the world around them learned that sometimes the only way to win was to stop fighting. You shift gently, the imagined table stretching around you, lit by flickering oil lamps. A general sits at one end, his armor dented and dusty. Across from him, an emissary from a rival city-state, robes torn at the hem, eyes wary but not unkind. Between them, not a sword, not a scroll, but a branch, pale green, smooth, freshly cut, the olive branch. It had already been sacred, of course, a symbol of Athena, of her gift, but it wasn't until war tore through fields and vineyards that someone thought to break a sprig and offer it forward. No speeches, no conditions, just hope, a gesture. You can see it now, fingers hovering, uncertain, as if the branch might explode, but instead it's accepted, gripped gently. War, at least for now, is paused. This may be myth, it may be truth. Historians still argue. But what matters is how the idea spread. Soon olive branches were carried by messengers, by envoys, by trembling hands extended from city gates. They appeared in rituals tied with white ribbon. They were held aloft by children in festivals. Even today, thousands of years later, they grace flags, sculptures, courtrooms, coins. The world has tried to replace the symbol, time and again. Doves, treaties, handshakes. But the olive branch remains because it's not just a symbol of peace. It's a reminder that peace must be grown. The olive tree doesn't shoot up overnight. It takes years, sometimes decades. You can't rush it. You can't force it. You tend it. You wait. You hope. Just like peace. Athens knew this. At least the best parts of Athens did. And so in times of tension, the olive branch became more than a token. It became a test. Would you accept it? Would you offer it? Would you choose the goddess who gave trees instead of weapons? There's a lesser-known practice, mentioned only briefly in ancient fragments, of burying an olive branch in the center of a disputed field. Neither side would touch it for a full season. If the tree sprouted from that branch, the land was declared sacred, unclaimable, shared. Not every story ended in truce, of course. Sometimes the branch was rejected, trampled, burned. But even in failure, the gesture lingered. And those who remembered Athena understood the branch wasn't about weakness, it was about wisdom. You sit up now in your dream space, elbows resting on the table of memory, and you imagine yourself in a room full of rivals, friends who argued, families that drifted, nations that forgot how to listen. Would you offer the branch? Would you accept it? Athena never promised peace would be easy, only that it would be possible. If you held out your hand, if you paused long enough to think, if you believed a tree could mean more than a wall, and in the soft light of oil lamps, with the olive branch resting between two weary hands, you see the truth. Sometimes the most powerful act is not raising a weapon, but lowering your voice. and planting something that takes time to grow. You exhale slowly, the sound barely louder than the breeze curling through the branches above. The olive tree beside you seems to lean just a little, like it's listening. Or maybe it's remembering, because even divine gifts have their dark seasons. And Athena's beloved tree? It once nearly vanished from Athens altogether. You're not imagining things. You didn't dream that part. There was a time when the olive trees of Athens, those proud, sacred Morii, withered, and not from war or axes or invading soldiers, but from something more insidious. Fungus. Yes, a blight, a slow, creeping, invisible kind of rot. You close your eyes and let the image form, the groves once lush and whispering, now silent. The leaves yellow. The fruit shriveled before it ripens. The oil turns cloudy, bitter, unusable. Amphorae go empty. Merchants frown. Priests look skyward. Farmers kneel in dry earth and ask questions no one answers. At first, they blamed Poseidon. Of course they did. He'd been holding a grudge since the city was named after all. Maybe he cursed the roots, maybe he salted the earth, maybe, just maybe, this was punishment for Athens growing too proud of a tree. But Athena stayed silent. The temples were quiet, and so panic set in. Some say the blight lasted 2 years, others say 5. A few whispered it never truly ended, that it still flares up from time to time, as a gentle reminder from the gods, care for what you were given. But during its height, Athens suffered. Economically, yes, olive oil was wealth, trade, diplomacy, but also culturally. Without olives, the festivals dulled, the lamps dimmed, the skin grew dry, and so did the mood. Philosophers debated whether the blight was divine punishment or natural consequence. Priests blamed improper offerings. Farmers blamed lazy harvesters. No one blamed Athena directly. But the altars got a bit dusty during that time. You picture a young girl, maybe 14, clutching a handful of sickly leaves, standing at the edge of a sacred grove. She's not angry, she's worried. She lays the leaves gently at the foot of a crumbling shrine, whispers something only she and the wind understand, and walks away. The next day, a sprout appears. Tiny, unimpressive, just a sliver of green pushing through grey soil like a whisper from the past. But it's enough. Soon, rumours spread. That tree is immune, or blessed, or both. Cuttings are taken, carefully, respectfully. Farmers pass knowledge like heirlooms. Don't overwater, prune in winter, burn the infected branches, rotate the groves, keep Athena's altar clean. And the city listens. They remember. You shift slightly now, your limbs heavy with the weight of slow-growing things, and imagine walking through the groves after the blight has passed. The trees are younger, shorter, but healthier. They no longer grow in tangled crowds, but in neat, respectful rows. Their fruit is smaller, but more flavorful. Their roots stronger, deeper. The oil that comes from these new trees is different too. It smells richer, tastes sharper. Some say it even glows differently in the lamplight. Athena returns to her temple, not in thunder, not in speech, but in presence. You can feel her in the breeze, in the hum of bees returning to the groves, in the way the priests oil the steps again before ceremonies, in the children who pluck olives and say thank you, not out of fear, but reverence. There's a new law passed. No citizen may harm a Morii tree, not even if it's sick. You must tend it. You must heal it. You must believe it can recover. And somewhere in that belief, Athena finds her way back. This time, quieter than before, not angry, not punishing, just waiting, because even the goddess of wisdom knows sometimes the lesson isn't in the planting, or the pressing, or the gift. Sometimes it's in the regrowth, and in the patience it takes to look at a bare branch and still imagine olives. The night stretches longer now, not in time, but in feeling, like the fabric of the story has grown soft around you. The olive trees no longer seem like individual trunks, but a single, living canopy, folding over your thoughts with the weight of centuries. You lie still beneath their whispering leaves, and something flickers in the dark. A light, small, gentle, ancient, It's not fire, not candle. It's older than both, yet more precise. You're watching someone carefully tilt a clay lamp to refill it, their hands steady despite the shadows. This is the olive oil lamp, and it brought light to the night before electricity was even a rumor. Imagine it, a world without switches, no buzzing tubes or LED glow. When darkness came, it came completely, a thick curtain pulled across the earth. In homes, in temples, even in the bathhouses and libraries, night was something to be respected, not banished. But Athena, goddess of knowledge, of order, of insight, didn't believe in letting wisdom sleep when the sun went down. And so the olive oil lamp became her quiet rebellion against ignorance, a little dish, a simple wick, and the golden oil of her sacred trees. You watch now as a priestess, barefoot and focused, lights the inner chamber of Athena's temple. She walks in a slow circle, feeding flame after flame. Each lamp sputters briefly, then catches. The walls, once stone, begin to ripple with golden motion. Athens glowed like this, not with fire, not with violence, but with steadiness. And yet these lamps weren't just functional, they were spiritual. The flame itself was thought to be sacred. It didn't just illuminate scrolls and meals, it stood for clarity, for vigilance, for a mind that never slept, even when the body needed to. That's why lamps burned all night in Athena's temples. That's why the eternal flame at the heart of the city was fueled by olive oil. The goddess never closed her eyes. Of course, oil lamps weren't without risk. You imagine a young boy, perhaps apprenticed to a scholar, dozing beside a lamp that was just a little too full, a jostle, a tip, a bit of parchment catching, a flame licking higher than it should. Enter Hades, not the god, the concept, because fires, true fires, terrified the ancients. One unattended lamp could level a home, a neighborhood, maybe a dream. So there were rules, wicks trimmed short, lamps placed in niches, stone sills dampened before lighting, clay basins laid in every home to catch spills. It was almost ceremonial, the way a mother lit a lamp in the evening, hands cupped around the flame like a prayer. Even the oil itself was filtered differently if it was meant for burning. Pressed slow, stored in cool chambers, a special mix, clearer, less pungent, more willing to burn evenly. Historians still argue whether this lamp oil was kept separate in every household or only in temples. But we know it existed, and we know it mattered, because to waste Athena's gift, especially in the form of reckless fire, was to disrespect her entirely. Which brings us to the fringe tidbit you've been waiting for. There's a peculiar myth recorded only in one crumbling scroll found beneath an old Athenian home that says Hades once visited Athens in disguise, not to steal souls, but to lecture someone about fire safety. Yes, truly. Disguised as a weary traveller, he knocked on doors until someone let him in. Upon seeing a family using their lamp oil to grease a squeaky loom, he frowned and muttered, "One day this city will burn if it forgets what it's made of." He left that same night, unnoticed, and days later a minor earthquake knocked a single lamp off its stand in the agora. It didn't start a fire, thanks to a hastily placed basin, but from then on oil lamps were never placed near tapestries again. Coincidence? Cautionary tale? No one knows. But in Athena's city, no one forgot. You turn over now, slowly, as if moving might extinguish the memory of those little flames lining every ledge. You picture Socrates hunched near one, reading aloud. A young mother nursing beside one, its glow softening the lines of her exhaustion. A temple priest refilling his lamp with shaking hands after staying up too late, wondering if the gods ever got tired. And in every lamp, a single flicker, a piece of the olive tree, a spark of Athena's patience. She didn't give them fire. She gave them control over it. She gave them light on their own terms. And in the dark silence of your thoughts now, one last lamp burns low. Not because it's dying, but because morning is coming. There's a hush now in the grove, heavier than silence, but softer than sleep. The kind that settles when every lamp has burned low, when even the owl has stopped calling and the air holds still, listening. But somewhere nearby, voices drift lazily from a courtyard lit with laughter and the glow of 100 tiny flames. You're walking into a symposium now, not a wild party, not quite a dinner, a gathering of minds, of philosophers, poets, statesmen, and occasionally someone who snuck in with a flute and a basket of olives. Tonight the mood is lively, a bit absurd, because seated in the place of honour across from a particularly smug-looking Sophocles is none other than Dionysus, god of wine and all things wonderfully ridiculous. And tonight he's debating Athena. Now, to be clear, Athena didn't attend symposia often, too much chaos, too many thought experiments about the morality of sandwiches. But in this myth, half-real, half-late-night wine ramble, she's here, poised, alert, armed only with an olive dish and the kind of glare that could straighten the spine of a satyr. The contest? Whose gift serves humanity better? Wine or olive oil? You settle cross-legged near the edge of the marble floor, invisible but very much entertained. Dionysus begins, of course, with a flourish. He lifts his goblet, spills a little for drama, and declares, "Wine, the nectar of celebration, the lifeblood of inspiration, the cure for shyness, poetry, and dinner with in-laws." He gestures to the crowd, who cheer half-heartedly, because frankly, they're already a few cups in. "And what of olive oil?" he smirks, swirling his drink. "It doesn't sing, it doesn't dance, it doesn't make you fall in love with the moon." Athena doesn't flinch, she doesn't raise her voice. She simply lifts a small amphora and pours. The oil glides out like gold caught dreaming. It lands in a dish, silent, perfect. She dips a crust of bread and speaks. Olive oil does not blur the world. It sharpens it, it feeds, it heals, it brings light when the sun has gone, and warmth when the body forgets its shape. Wine makes you forget pain.
Olive oil prevents it. A beat of silence. Even Dionysus pauses. In the far corner, a philosopher tries to applaud and accidentally tips over a fruit bowl. And then it begins, the back and forth. Dionysus with his poetry and passion, Athena with her reason and subtle wit. The crowd is torn. Some raise their cups, others dip their bread. Arguments are made, metaphors hurled. Someone sings, someone else weeps. And in the middle of it all, a plate of olives, ignored at first, then slowly emptied. One by one, the guests reach for them, not because they were part of the contest, but because they're there, salty, anchoring, the only thing in the room not demanding attention, just existing. And that, in the end, becomes Athena's unspoken victory, because olive oil and the olives themselves never ask for applause, they just serve, quietly, always. In feast or famine, in joy or grief.
While wine demands, olives remain. Historians still argue whether this tale ever existed outside of candlelight banter, but it's recorded on a single surviving drinking cup, a kylix, with Dionysus on one side, lounging with a goblet, and Athena on the other, sternly holding a branch. Between them, a cluster of tiny etched olives. You lie back now, eyes fluttering closed, and you feel it, the comfort of something dependable, of something that doesn't seek praise but earns it, not with thunder, but with nourishment. And maybe that's why Athena came to the symposium after all, not to win, but to remind them what stays behind when the laughter fades and the wine runs dry, the oil in the lamp, the olives in the bowl, the quiet in the grove. You're resting now in that dreamy space between thought and sleep, where stories blur into smells and memories feel like things you can touch. The laughter from the symposium has faded into the distance, replaced by the soft shuffle of sandals on dirt and the steady rhythm of someone running, not with panic, not with purpose, with duty. Tonight you follow Phidippides. Yes, that Phidippides, the man who ran from Marathon to Athens, breathless and unstoppable, to announce the victory over the Persians, the original long-distance messenger, the prototype for marathons and overachieving gym playlists everywhere. But before he became legend, before his lungs collapsed under his final cry of Nike, he was just a courier. A man whose strength wasn't in fame, but in feet. Feet toughened by dirt roads, calloused by gravel, oiled before each journey like a machine being carefully maintained. And yes, he packed olives, not dried meat, not honey cakes, not figs. Those were for festivals, but for distance, for real travel, for keeping going when your lungs burn and your muscles scream, olives. And olive oil, they were compact, high in fat, salty, preserved, easy to stuff into a cloth pouch, and, perhaps most importantly, tied directly to Athena. A talisman and a snack, all in one bite. You picture him now crouched at dawn, checking his sandals, smearing a bit of oil across his legs like a second skin, not vanity, ritual. He whispers a prayer, not to Hermes, god of speed, but to Athena, for strategy, for stamina, for the wisdom to know when to pace and when to sprint. Then he's off. The road stretches before him, rising and falling like the breath of the earth, hills, dust, heat. And in his pocket, a small cloth bundle of olives, black and wrinkled, soaked in oil and salt. Every hour or so he eats one, just enough to keep going. They don't cheer, they don't sugar rush, they endure, like the goddess who gifted them. By the time he reaches Athens, his tunic is soaked, his legs barely move, his mouth tastes like copper and hope. He delivers the news, collapses, becomes legend. But the olives? They made it with him. Some say one was found still clutched in his hand, pressed flat, slick with oil. Others say he dropped the last pit just outside the city gate, and that a tree grew there, twisted and stubborn, defying the odds like the runner who carried it. Historians still debate the details. Was the distance really 26 miles? Was it truly one man or a relay of several? Did he carry olives, or is that just Athenian food branding at its finest? No matter. Because the point is this: olive oil helped fuel one of the most legendary runs in human memory, not by bursting energy, but by lasting. And here's the beautiful twist. Pheidippides wasn't just a wartime runner. Before the battle, he was sent to Sparta to ask for help. That's 140 miles, one way. He made it in 2 days. Imagine that, alone, across rocky, sun-baked terrain. Just a pouch of olives and a mind full of reasons to keep moving. You sit up slightly now, the grove around you tilting toward morning. You feel that same stretch in your legs, the echo of a breath you didn't take. And you realize Athena's gifts weren't loud, they were useful. Olives for the soldier, oil for the scholar, light for the weary. And strength, real strength for the one who had to keep going, even when every part of him wanted to stop. Pheidippides became a myth, but the olives, they were there the whole way, quiet, portable, powerful, like the goddess who knew that sometimes the best fuel isn't fire, it's endurance. The air feels thicker now, not heavy, not humid, but full of memory, like you're walking through a dream that others walked before you. You're no longer trailing mythic runners or wandering sacred groves. Tonight, you find yourself backstage, behind the pomp, behind the procession, behind the laurel-crowned statues and marble steps. You're in a tiny, smoky room. And it's itchy in here, because this is where they keep the olive wreaths, the ones you've seen on every victorious head, in every Athenian festival, every Pan-Hellenic game, every temple ceremony. Yes, the olive crown, humble, beautiful, and deeply uncomfortable if you wore it too long. You reach for one now carefully. It's fragile. Not the stiff gold diadem you'd expect. Just a circle of twisted olive branches, still green, still smelling faintly of sun and dust and hand-pressed oil. These wreaths were called katinos, and they weren't ornamental. They were earned. In the Olympic Games, not the ones with mascots and medals, but the original ones where men ran barefoot and oiled, and winners sometimes cried from the sheer effort of not collapsing, the only prize was this: a crown of leaves from a sacred grove. Let that sink in. No gold, no purse. Just a loop of branches from a tree grown in the sanctuary of Zeus, trimmed carefully with a sacred knife and woven into a quiet declaration: you were the best today, and in Athens this tradition was elevated even further. During the Panathenaic Games, winners would receive not only amphorae of Athena's olive oil, but also the honour of being crowned with a wreath. It was light, it was temporary, it was wildly itchy. And yet, to wear it was to wear legacy. You can almost see them now, tired athletes slumped on temple steps, olive crowns askew, sand still clinging to their knees. Some wore the wreaths for hours, others removed them immediately, tucking them into baskets or laying them at Athena's altar. Not as a symbol of personal glory, but as a thank you for surviving the trial. Still, not everyone wore theirs with grace. There's one story, possibly exaggerated, of a sprinter so proud of his win that he refused to take the wreath off for 3 days. He wore it to the agora, to the baths, to dinner. By the end of day 2, it had wilted. By the end of day 3, he had a rash. The gods have a sense of humour and fashion advice. You lie still now, imagining the feeling of that crown on your own head. Light, yes, but oddly noticeable. The branches poke a little, the leaves tickle your forehead. It's not exactly comfortable, which might be the point. Victory should be felt, not just in your lungs or your legs, but on your skin. A reminder that triumph isn't silk and laurel, it's bark and leaf, and a bit of sweat still drying. There's another version of the myth, one rarely told, where an olive wreath refused to wither. It had been given to a young boy who won a race for orphans, not warriors. He placed it on a statue of Athena and never touched it again. Days passed, then weeks. The wreath stayed green. Some say it was a miracle, others say it was just fresh when he picked it. But in time, the myth grew, and that wreath became a symbol of pure intention, winning not for glory, but for meaning, for effort, for offering something back. Historians still argue whether the evergreen wreath truly existed, or if it was just a poetic metaphor. But every year, in small corners of Greece, olive branches are still twisted into crowns for children's plays, folk dances, quiet weddings. Not flashy, just honest. And each one seems to carry a whisper. This was enough. You tried, you finished, you honoured the goddess. That's what Athena valued. Not the gold, not the swagger, but the work. The stillness after, the crown that didn't sparkle but remembered. You close your eyes, imagining the crown resting lightly on your head. You're not performing, not posing, just sitting there in the hush, knowing that something in you grew strong, and something ancient noticed. The crown of olive branches rests on your brow now, not heavy, not glamorous, just there, like a quiet hand on your shoulder, and you can feel the way it presses ever so slightly into your skin. Not to hurt, just to remind you it's real, earned, a part of something older than applause. And yet, not everyone wears their reverence so gracefully. You're standing now in the back corner of an Athenian classroom, stone benches lined in a semicircle, and in front of them, gesturing wildly with a stick, already sweating through his tunic, is a man named Hippias. He is a philosopher, which is to say, he's talking a lot, and in nearly every third sentence he invokes Athena. Athena would never approve of this syllogism. Athena teaches us the virtue of moderation in oratory. Athena, in her infinite wisdom, obviously agrees with my position on civic taxation. You stifle a chuckle, because tonight you're learning about Athena's frustrating fan club. They mean well, they really do, but for every thoughtful devotee carefully tending an olive grove or laying oil before her statue, there were at least 3 blabbering intellectuals using her name as an excuse for whatever hot take had just tumbled out of their mouth. Athena wasn't a warm goddess. She didn't hug, she didn't sing lullabies, but she was also never known to interrupt, which meant her followers often filled the silence with assumptions. You sit in on one of these philosophical salons, a dusty room full of students arguing about the proper dimensions of a shield, or whether Athena would have preferred cold or room temperature lentil soup. The answers vary, the voices rise, someone throws a scroll, and the owl perched in the window rolls its eyes. Historians still argue whether Athena encouraged this obsessive debate culture or simply tolerated it. But there's no denying that in Athens, invoking her name was a rhetorical power move. She became the patron of not only wisdom, but correctness, which led to, well, a few problems. Picture this. You're a playwright, nervous, pacing backstage at the Dionysia Festival. Your new tragedy opens tonight. You've woven in themes of courage, betrayal, and forgiveness. And in the final act, the hero chooses love over war, rejects the sword, embraces peace. It's powerful, emotional, fresh. And then, halfway through the performance, a man in the second row stands up holding a fig in one hand and yelling, "Athena would never approve of this pacifism." He throws the fig. It misses, but still. You sigh lying back on a cool marble step and imagine Athena hearing this from her temple above the theatre. She probably doesn't shout down. She doesn't send a lightning bolt. She just squints, and somewhere quietly a fig tree withers in embarrassment. Still, she endures her fan base, because beneath the pomp and the name dropping, there's genuine respect. These people admire her. They trust her. They model their ideals, however loudly, on the virtues she embodies. And every now and then someone gets it right, like the teacher who keeps an unadorned olive branch on her desk, not because it's sacred, but because it reminds her to pause before speaking. Or the soldier who refuses to burn a rival's grove during war, remembering the law that sacred trees are never to be touched. Or the architect who designs a building with perfect symmetry, not because it pleases the eye, but because it reflects Athena's principle. That function can be beauty. Those are the followers who speak Athena's true language, not words, action. You sit with that now. The difference between those who shout her name and those who live her values, between empty praise and quiet alignment. And you wonder, if Athena walked the streets of modern Athens today, would she stop at the crowded lecture hall? Or would she find her way to a shadowy alley where someone's tending a tree that no one else noticed? Probably the latter. Because Athena never cared about flattery. She cared about follow-through. She cared that her city stayed sharp, that its lamps stayed lit, that her name meant something earned, not just something said. And so she watches, still, not from the sky, but from behind the eyes of those who do the work. You breathe slower now, your body settling like an amphora into soft earth. Somewhere in the back of your mind, the olive groves continue, leaf after leaf, each one holding a little story, a little rustle of something sacred. But tonight, the stories get stranger, earthier, goatier, because now we enter the realm of unexpected battle. A war not waged with spears or scrolls, but with hooves and molars. Welcome to how olive trees outsmarted goats. Yes, goats. You see, long before olive oil was being drizzled over barley or lighting the minds of philosophers, the trees themselves had a very real enemy. An enemy that munched without mercy, that climbed, chewed, trampled, and digested with zero shame. The ancient goat. And not just any goat, the hardy, semi-feral, mountain-scaling kind. The kind with sideways eyes and the moral compass of a hungry toddler. These goats weren't evil. They were just extremely efficient. If it was green, they ate it. If it had bark, they gnawed it.
And if it had fruit, say goodbye. The Greeks
noticed this problem early. They loved their goats for milk, cheese, wool, ritual sacrifice. But they also loved their olive trees, and the two loves were not compatible. Something had to give. Now, Athena may not have micromanaged agriculture, but she definitely had opinions. After all, the olive tree was her gift. It couldn't just be left to the mercy of roaming livestock with poor impulse control. So, according to one whispery fragment of local folklore, Athena made a quiet deal with the trees. She gave them a trick. You lie back now and picture it. Goats approaching a grove at dawn, bleating softly, hooves clacking on dusty ground. They sniff the air, they spot the leaves, they charge in, and then pause. Because these leaves, they're bitter, really bitter, not in the poetic sense. In the chemical sense, olive leaves are full of compounds like all European. A word you don't need to remember, but the goats definitely did. It made the leaves taste sharp, unpleasant, slightly medicinal. Think old cough syrup mixed with dandelion tea and regret. Most goats, upon the first bite, made a face, not unlike a child, tricked into eating kale chips. And slowly, over generations, they started avoiding olive trees entirely. Not all goats, there were always rebels. But enough of them learned. Athena's trees had won not with thorns or height, but with flavour. Historians still argue whether this bitterness was a natural adaptation or a myth layered onto biology. But one thing is clear. Ancient farmers noticed the resistance. They began planting olive groves with strategic spacing, often on rocky terrain where goats wouldn't bother climbing. They even passed laws, actual written laws, protecting groves from overgrazing. In Athens, damaging a sacred olive tree, accidentally or otherwise, could get you fined, exiled, or worse. And if your goat was caught snacking on one, let's just say the goat might find itself honourably sacrificed at the next festival, preferably with a side of apology figs. You turn your head slightly and smile because there's something deeply Athena about this kind of solution. No drama, no divine lightning bolts, just biochemistry. Even the trees she gifted were clever. You imagine an olive tree chuckling, if it could, as a goat snorts and walks away, looking for something less controversial to chew. And you realize something. Athena's brilliance wasn't just in giving humanity something useful. It was in giving the tree itself the ability to survive. She didn't protect every branch with a divine shield. She gave it the tools to adapt, to defend itself with taste, to grow where others couldn't. And isn't that the secret of the olive tree? It thrives in rocky soil. It doesn't need much water. It bends in storms without breaking. It outsmarts its enemies, not with violence, but with persistence, with timing, with leaves that say, "Eat me once, I dare you." Athena, of course, never confirmed any of this. She didn't have to. The trees spoke for her. The grove feels quieter now, not just because night has deepened, but because the trees themselves seem to be listening, not rustling, not whispering, just still. As if they're holding their breath, waiting for a sound they've heard before, the clatter of footsteps too young to know reverence. You're in a small olive orchard just outside ancient Athens, tucked behind a row of simple homes, not a sacred grove, not a temple garden, just a humble patch of trees passed down through generations. And here come the teenagers. Ah, yes, even in ancient times they existed, restless, scrappy, armed with slingshots, bad poetry, and an unfortunate tendency to test boundaries. You see them now, 4 of them, maybe 5, ducking between the trees under cover of dusk, laughing, whispering. One of them carries a small pot of paint, another a very poorly rolled scroll. Someone has brought wine, which is almost definitely stolen. They're here for fun. And maybe, just maybe, for mischief. Because tonight they're going to climb one of the Morii, Athena's sacred olive trees, not for harvesting, not for pruning, just to say they did it, to leave a mark, to scratch their names into bark, to tie a ribbon, to carve something rude in crude Doric, to post, well, if they had social media, this would be a flex, but they didn't. They had amphora, an amphora break. As you watch, one of the boys scrambles up a low branch. He grins, balancing awkwardly, and throws a twig at the others. Another claps. The girl with the wine tries to uncork it with her teeth. And then, crack, a branch gives way. He falls, harmlessly, into a patch of soft dirt, but the sound echoes, a sharp, splintering noise that cuts through the quiet. The grove stills, and somewhere nearby, an old woman steps out of her doorway. She doesn't yell, she doesn't curse. She walks over, slowly, staff tapping against the earth, and stands beneath the wounded tree. She looks up, then down at the boy, who is trying very hard not to cry. Her voice is calm, soft, almost kind. "Did you make an offering before climbing?" she asks. He shakes his head. She nods, not surprised. Then she says the line passed down by generations of olive keepers. Every tree remembers who forgets it. A chill slips through the air. as if even the moon has leaned in to listen. The teenagers scatter, of course. They mumble apologies, swear they didn't know, promise to come back and make it right. But will they? Maybe. There's a local legend told in hushed tones at festival fires about a boy who once mocked the Morii, climbed a sacred tree, broke off a branch, and used it as a walking stick. Days later, his right arm went numb, couldn't carry a sword, couldn't even lift a cup. The priest claimed it was a coincidence. The farmers weren't so sure. They planted a wreath at the foot of the tree, poured oil, whispered thanks, and the arm, they say, healed. Historians dismiss the tale, of course, but olive growers, they believe. You lie still now, feeling the edge of that memory press gently against your thoughts. It's not about curses or punishment, it's about balance. Athena didn't curse the boy. She reminded him these trees, her gift, were meant to be tended, not taken, respected, not climbed like ladders to impress a friend. And so every Athenian child, once old enough to tie their own sandals, was taught to greet a Morii tree. Just a nod, a quiet word, a drop of oil at the root, nothing fancy, just acknowledgement. Because the olive tree, like its goddess, watches in silence. It doesn't need revenge, it waits. And if you return, if you whisper, "I'm sorry," if you press your palm to its bark and promise to remember, it forgives, slowly, steadily, just like it grows. You can almost smell it now, sharp and earthy, the ghost of vinegar, herbs and oil. The scent drifts lazily from a long abandoned temple kitchen, one so old and forgotten that even the mice have moved on. The stone here is warm to the touch, worn smooth by thousands of feet, thousands of years, and maybe just a bit of salad dressing. Because tonight we find ourselves in a rather unexpected mystery. The temple that smelled like salad. Yes, really. It began, as many oddities in Athens did, with a question. Why, a group of 19th century archaeologists asked as they leaned over crumbled mosaics and cracked amphorae, did the inner chamber of this temple, dedicated to Athena, smell faintly of rosemary, vinegar, and olives? It wasn't incense, it wasn't decay, it was vinaigrette. Not the artificial kind, not bottled, but something ancient, something soaked in. The temple, modest in size but rich in lore, was discovered at the edge of what had once been a busy civic district. It had no grand columns, no gold leaf statues, but there were signs of oil everywhere. Clay vessels, shattered and preserved, still bore the dark stain of aged olive oil, their spouts clogged with sediment. The floors, when exposed to sunlight, gave off a faint shimmer, as if something had soaked deep into the stone and refused to leave. At first, the scholars thought it was ritual. Maybe this had been a temple to Athena as cook or Athena as household guardian. A place where prayers were made over stew pots, where olives were blessed before being preserved, where villagers came not for divine visions but for something far more human, a recipe that worked. But then came the more peculiar finds. In one storage room, dozens of olive pits carefully sorted by size. In another, a wall carving depicting what could only be described as a mixing bowl, shallow, circular, with two priestesses pouring from identical jugs, one marked with a leaf, the other with what appeared to be a cluster of grapes, oil and vinegar, combined deliberately. And behind them, a loaf of bread, fresh, fragrant, cracked in half. Was this divine dipping? You smile to yourself, picturing Athena raising an eyebrow at the thought. But maybe, just maybe, she approved, because in the heart of every sacred act was something practical, something nourishing. The Greeks didn't separate the spiritual from the mundane. If bread fed the body, and oil preserved the bread, and vinegar kept it fresh, then together they were holy. Even now the debate continues. Was it truly a temple, or simply a culinary centre that earned the name because of its consistent service? Did Athena walk its halls, or did bakers and housewives invoke her name because she had, once upon a time, gifted them the tree that made everything possible? Historians still argue, but the scent? It lingers. Some say when the summer sun strikes the flagstones just right, you can still smell it. The faint aroma of cracked pepper, crushed herbs, and sun-ripened olives. It curls up from the earth like steam from a warm plate, wafting through time. One researcher, half-joking, once called it Athena's pantry, but others took it more seriously. They believed that this humble temple was something rarer than a shrine or a palace, that it was a place where the divine lived not in marble or prophecy, but in routine, in the act of pressing oil, of pouring it slowly into vinegar, of tearing bread in silence, alone at dusk and whispering thanks, because if Athena was the goddess of wisdom, then surely she would have known that some wisdom doesn't come from scrolls. It comes from taste, from remembering what feeds you, from noticing when something simple becomes something sacred. And so the temple remained, not the grandest, not the loudest, but perhaps the most human, a place where people gathered not to ask for miracles, but to say, "This is enough." And with each drop of oil on stone, they meant it. You stretch now, just slightly, as though your body has been listening too long without moving, and even your dreams need to shift positions. The scent of olive oil still lingers, faint and herbal, but now there's something else in the air. A kind of tension, the quiet crackle of frustration settling behind the eyes. Athena's had a long day, and when Athena gets frustrated, she carves. Tonight you find yourself walking into a wide, open room, half studio, half sanctuary. It's carved into the hillside above Athens, not quite a temple, not quite a cave. The walls are lined with chisels, brushes, half-finished reliefs, and strange little clay heads that all seem to be scowling. Welcome to Athena's passive-aggressive sculpture hobby. Now it's well documented that the goddess of wisdom expressed herself through action. She taught, she strategized, she advised, but she also, on occasion, just needed to make something with her hands. And when diplomacy failed, or the men in togas refused to listen, or Ares swaggered in again, uninvited, she didn't yell. She picked up a chisel. According to a handful of half-preserved myths and one extremely smug mosaic in Rhodes, Athena would retreat to her sacred workshop when mortals disappointed her. There she sculpted statues, not statues of herself. She wasn't that kind of goddess, but statues of ideas, of warnings, of what she would have said if she hadn't been too composed to say it aloud. One story tells of a figure she carved with exaggerated muscles and no head. She didn't explain it. Everyone assumed it was Ares. Another sculpture depicted a man staring into a scroll while walking straight into a tree, allegedly based on an actual Athenian senator. But her most famous creation, spoken of in whispers, referenced only in broken pottery shards, was a figure called the Thinker who forgot to listen. It showed a philosopher, one hand on his chin, the other holding a large amphora over a fire. The implication? Brilliant thoughts, terrible follow-through. Some say this statue was once placed at the edge of the Acropolis, facing outward as a warning. Thought without action is just noise. Others believe it never left her studio. But here's where the myth bends toward magic. There are tales, quiet, mostly fringe, of statues that moved, not marched, not attacked, just shifted. A blink here, a head turned, a hand pointing at a sentence that had just been spoken. One priest swore that during a particularly tense temple debate, the clay face of a nearby bust winced, just slightly, just once, as if even in sculpture, Athena could not hold back a well-earned sigh. Historians still argue whether these stories are metaphor or memory, whether the goddess truly infused her creations with life, or whether the mortals simply saw what they feared, their own foolishness reflected in stone. You wander through this imagined workshop now, brushing your fingers across grooves in marble, sharp, deliberate. Athena didn't sculpt for beauty. She sculpted to make a point. Her lines are exact. Her expressions unmistakable. Not rage, not despair. Just that very specific, very dignified kind of divine irritation. You know the look, the one your teacher gave you when you asked a question you should have known the answer to. The one your grandmother gave you when you salted the stew after she tasted it. That's Athena's look, and her statues wore it well. Still, it wasn't all criticism. There were moments of grace. In one corner of the studio, a statue stands taller than the rest, a woman, no older than 20, holding a scroll in one hand and an olive branch in the other. Her face is serene. Her foot rests lightly on a closed helmet. A depiction of wisdom after war. Athena never signed her work, never claimed it publicly, but the detail and the intent, it's unmistakable. The temple scribes years later would write, "She sculpted the city as she sculpted marble, with patience, precision, and pressure. And now you lie back again, letting that idea settle. That sometimes when words fail, when people don't listen, when even gods grow tired of arguing, the only thing left to do is make something solid, something enduring, something that says, you'll understand later. And centuries from now, someone will run their hand across the cooled surface and whisper, she was right." You breathe in deeply, the air around you thick with the scent of dust, olive bark, and cool stone. The grove feels different now, less a collection of trees, more a presence, as if it has been listening to your thoughts all this time, waiting for the right moment to lean in and whisper its own story. And tonight, it tells you about a tree. Not just a tree. The olive tree that refused to die. You walk slowly toward the Acropolis, not as it is now, tourist-heavy, roped off, half lost to time, but as it was then, newly built, reverent, gleaming in the soft shine of polished marble and belief. The Erechtheion temple rises to your right, with its famous porch of the caryatids, columns shaped like women, frozen in mid-thought. And just beyond them, in a small enclosed space, stands Athena's original olive tree. Yes, that one. The tree she planted when she won the contest, the first to spring from dry earth at the tap of her spear, the one the city was named for, the one every other tree whispered about behind its leaves. Now, to be clear, trees don't typically live thousands of years. Even the hardiest olive trees begin to twist and hollow with time. But this tree, this one had a story all its own. When the Persians invaded Athens in 480 BCE, they burned everything: homes, temples, statues, books, the Acropolis itself. And the tree. They set it alight, charred it down to ash and stump. And the people mourned, not just for what was lost, but for what the tree had meant, a symbol of their beginning, of Athena's favor, of peace, wisdom, survival. But the story doesn't end there, because the very next day, a shoot sprang up from the blackened roots, thin, fragile, green as new hope. The priests wept when they saw it, not out of fear, out of relief, because this wasn't just regrowth, this was proof that Athena was still watching, that the soul of the city hadn't been scorched out, that life, even in the face of fire and war and ruin, could still rise. You pause now in your mind, kneeling beside the stump, watching that tiny green shoot tremble in the wind. Someone places a ring of stones around it, another pours water, a child picks up a burnt olive pit and hides it in her pocket. The myth grew quickly. They said the tree could not be destroyed, that it would always return, that Athena had placed something eternal in its roots, not just divinity, but defiance. Over the centuries, the tree endured. Invaders came and went. Empires fell. Stone crumbled. Columns collapsed. But the olive tree remained. It was cut down. It grew back. It was burned again. It grew back. It was struck by lightning. It grew back. Even in modern times, under occupation, during wars, under clouds of smoke and noise, the Athenian people watched their tree. Not as farmers, not as tourists, as descendants, because they didn't just inherit the tree, they inherited what it meant. To bend, not break, to grow from what hurt you, to keep reaching for the sun even when your bark has split and your roots are tired. You reach out now and press your hand against the imagined trunk. It's warm, smooth in places, cracked in others. You can feel the rings under your palm, not in circles, but in stories. And somewhere within those rings is the moment when fire met root and lost. There's a small iron fence around the real tree now. You can still visit it today. It stands beside the Erechtheion, guarded not by soldiers, but by silence. People don't shout near it. They whisper, they step lightly, they leave olive pits, coins, paper notes. A few even cry, not because the tree is beautiful, but because it's still here. A living fragment of a goddess's promise, and the quiet, leafy voice of a city that once rose from ash and dared to name itself after wisdom. The dawn is brushing gently at the edges of your dream now, just pale hints of warmth softening the sky, not enough to wake you, but enough to make the darkness feel thinner. The olive grove is still, but it holds you a little tighter, like it knows the end of the story is coming soon. And just before the curtain falls, Athena offers one last secret. Tonight you step into the quiet world of olive oil magic. Yes, magic. Not spells with wands or curses muttered under breath, but the subtle, daily kind of enchantment woven into rituals, old wives' tales, kitchen whispers. The kind of magic that never made it into the epics, but was passed from grandmother to granddaughter with a wink and a spoon. Olive oil, you see, wasn't just food. It was medicine. It was protection. It was blessing. Let's begin with the body. In ancient Athens, Athens, olive oil was the first aid kit before there was gauze. Mixed with honey or ash or crushed fig leaves, it was rubbed into wounds, massaged onto bruises, smeared on the forehead to ease the heat of thinking too much. Infants were bathed in it, not scrubbed, anointed, to welcome them, to guard them, to keep their skin soft and their soul protected from whatever might be lurking just beyond the veil. And then there were the athletes, glorious, sweaty, very nude athletes who slicked their bodies in oil before every match, partly for tradition, partly for muscle care, but partly to ward off harm. You can almost hear the whispered hope beneath each application. May this oil be a shield. Even soldiers carried flasks of it, not to eat, to use, to rub into aching joints after marches, or to cleanse their weapons in small circular strokes, invoking Athena's favour between battles. But the real magic, the deep magic, lived in the homes. Olive oil was dripped across thresholds to protect against evil spirits, left open under moonlight to absorb calm dreams, mixed with herbs and sealed in bottles to give as charms to brides and travellers. One recipe, found scrawled on a worn tablet in a poor district of Athens, describes an oil infused with lavender, salt, and a strand of hair to keep sorrow from returning to the home. Simple, quiet, tender. Olive oil was also used to read the future. Drop a bit in water, watch the way it moves. If it spreads wide, news is coming. If it curls in on itself, a visitor. If it sinks, best stay home today. Historians still argue whether these traditions were widespread or fringe, whether the rituals were respected or just harmless peasant theatre. But the evidence clings like the faint shine on an old amphora that smells ever so faintly of time and something heavier, hope. And even today, in villages across the Mediterranean, you can find women who will pour oil into bowls of water and murmur prayers for protection, love, clarity. They don't shout, they don't claim miracles. They just know, they know what the ancients knew, that when the world feels out of control, when your heart races and the nights are long, and you've heard one too many bits of bad news, you reach for the oil, you light a lamp, you dip bread, you anoint the skin behind your ears, you cook something warm, and you wait. Because Athena's gift was never just a tree or a crop or a culinary flex, it was a reminder that even in chaos you can tend to something, even in sorrow you can soothe. Even in darkness you can make light with your own hands. You turn now, slowly, the grove a blanket of green around you, the air heavy with memory and meaning. You feel that ancient comfort pass over your skin, cool, fragrant, real. Like someone who's been watching the whole time has just nodded and said gently, "You're safe now." You're barely moving now, you're breathing steady, your limbs long gone to stillness. But your mind is drifting, gliding quietly through the last corridors of this ancient tale. The grove has faded behind you. The temple lights have dimmed, and yet the warmth of the olive oil still coats your memory like a soft glow left on a plate long after dinner is done. Tonight, you've stepped into the archives. Not the polished halls of the modern world, but the dusty, candlelit corners of a forgotten Athenian library. Here, scrolls live like coiled snakes in cubbyholes. The air smells like leather, charcoal ink, and the faintest hint of olives again. You sit with a scholar who has no name, just a grey beard, ink-stained fingers, and a cough that sounds like dry papyrus being rolled too tight. He's copying a list, a long one, of all the things olive oil has ever been used for, not philosophically, not poetically, just logistically. It's kind of hilarious, actually. He squints as he writes, muttering under his breath. Cooking, lighting, bathing, preserving, embalming, lubricating temple hinges. He pauses, dips his reed pen again, adds, bribing a charioteer? You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. You didn't hear it from me. It's in this room, quiet and forgotten, that you begin to realize the legacy of the olive tree wasn't built in speeches or battles. It was built in habits, in repetition, in oil poured again and again into the same worn lamp, in olives brined and packed into clay jars carried across seas, in calloused hands wringing rags soaked in oil to polish wood, to soothe joints, to anoint the dead and bless the newborn. The small acts, daily, reverent, not because they were grand, but because they lasted. Athena didn't gift Athens a miracle. She gifted it a system, and every use, no matter how mundane, was part of the devotion. Even taxes. Yes, olive oil was taxed. One dusty scroll in the corner of the archive is just a list of how many amphorae were owed from each grove, and one groan-worthy note from a scribe who had to count every shipment by hand. You grin, because even the goddess of wisdom couldn't spare her people from bureaucracy. There are records of oil being used to seal letters, drip a little along the folded edge, press with a seal, and your message is both secured and scented. Love letters, decrees, recipes. You wonder if someone ever sent a message that simply read, "Here, taste this. I thought of you." Athena would have approved, because for all her sternness, her careful gaze, her spear and armor and owl, she understood intimacy. She knew that strength wasn't just in strategy. It was in preservation, in care, in remembering to light the lamp before night fell, in passing down not just stories, but recipes, methods, measurements. And now, as the scholar yawns and you settle deeper into the candlelight, you feel the long stretch of history folding itself around you, scroll by scroll, branch by branch, bite by bite. It's all been kept, not perfectly, not without loss, but enough. Enough to know that a tree planted in myth became a truth in practice. A gift from a goddess became 1,000 quiet acts of faith. And you? You've walked among them, not as a god, not as a hero, but as a witness, and in doing so you've carried the story forward. Gently, like oil poured into a waiting lamp. The world is soft now. You can feel it in the way the air no longer presses down, but floats, quiet, like silk over skin. The olive trees, once so detailed in your mind, have faded into outlines. The marble floors, the bronze lamps, the amphorae sealed with wax and reverence, all dissolving now into warmth and memory. You've reached the end, but endings in Athens, like olives pressed into oil, are never final. They simply become part of something else. You're sitting in a circle again, just like in the beginning. This time, it's not a temple, not a symposium, not a myth, just a kitchen, somewhere quiet, a wooden table, a cracked bowl, a loaf of bread with the steam still rising. A small dish filled halfway with golden olive oil glistening in the soft hush of early morning, and across from you someone's grandmother, wrinkled hands, steady eyes, a voice that speaks not to instruct, but to remind. She doesn't tell you the whole myth. She doesn't recite the names of gods. She just points to the oil. "This is Athena," she says. "This is her story." And you believe her, because by now you understand. Athena was never just the goddess of war strategy and wisdom scrolls. She was the keeper of what lasted, the architect of calm, the protector of practice, the mother of olive trees that outlive empires. You dip the bread, taste it, let it linger. It's richer than you remember, maybe a little peppery, maybe a little sweet, but familiar, safe. Outside, the wind rustles through a tree that might be 3 years old or 3,000. A single olive falls, thudding gently into the grass. It doesn't shout, it doesn't glow, but it means everything. The grove waits, Athena waits, and you, sleepy now, full of bread and old stories and starlight, you rest back into the circle of things. Where nothing is rushed, where the oil is always poured slowly, and where wisdom, if you're patient, always returns. And now, let it all drift away. Let the names blur and the temples fade. Let the scrolls close softly and the amphorae settle into dust. Let the quiet stretch across your limbs like warm linen, tugging gently at your edges, reminding your body that it's time to rest. You've walked through a world older than memory tonight. You've listened to stones and trees and shadows. You've stood where gods once stood, barefoot on marble, wrapped in olive-scented wind, and you've learned that even the mightiest stories are rooted in the smallest things. A branch, a drop, a light in the dark. Soften your breathing. Let your thoughts dissolve into stillness, like oil settling in a lamp before it's lit. Let each blink stretch a little longer until even the sound of your own mind feels like a gentle hush wrapping around your shoulders. You're safe here, not in a palace, not on a battlefield, but in a grove, quiet, kind, patient. The kind of place where nothing demands your attention, but everything offers peace. Let go of questions, of noise, of time. You've learned enough for tonight. You've wandered far enough. And now, as the final image fades, the olive leaf curling in slow motion as it falls toward the earth, just breathe. That's all. Sleep will come. It always does. And when it does, Athena will be there, not loud, not armored, but watching gently, with a bowl of oil and a whisper of wisdom and all the calm in the world.